Chapter 370. In midsummer, the sky in the north lit up earlier than in the south. When the sky and earth of Huading were still blurred between light and darkness, the sun had gradually appeared on Mount Dibing in Beihai. Mount Dibing was not high, but its location was extremely open. It was backed by the sea and overlooked Xingzhou. The rising sun rose from the sea. The sunlight fell on Mount Dibing and seemed to dispel all the shadows in an instant. Qin Weibai looked at the top of the mountain quietly and climbed the mountain on foot. There was sunlight on the top of the mountain. The light pierced the trees and flowers on the mountain road and fell down, mottled. She walked quietly all the way up. It was quiet in the mountain, but in a large area that was not easy to notice, the grass and treetops were very slightly undulating, like the natural shaking after the wind. Qin Weibai walked up. The wind seemed to be moving up. Therefore, as she moved forward, the whole mountain seemed to be shaking gently. It's really a big deal. Lin Fengting walked beside Qin Weibai and suddenly laughed at himself. He whispered, "It's the first time I've been treated like this since I came to Mount Dibing." Flaming fire followed them in silence. Her body was obviously a little stiff and nervous. Her vigilant eyes swept the gently shaking flowers and trees in the mountain from time to time. The whole mountain was shaking. Of course, it was not because of Qin Weibai's footsteps. It was because of the footsteps of countless people. After summer solstice was attacked on Mount Dibing, the passage and connections of Samsara Palace that could go up the mountain quietly had been completely destroyed by Wang Tianzong. So now the three of them went up the mountain aboveboard. The so-called aboveboard was that every move of the three of them was under the watch of Mount Dibing. When the three of them went up the mountain, the internal security forces stationed in the Wang family of Beihai were also going up the mountain. They were surrounded by the internal security forces all the time. Even more than the internal security forces. At this moment, no one knew how many high-tech and powerful weapons of the Wang family of Beihai were secretly aimed at the three of them. How terrible was Mount Dibing, which had launched a comprehensive defense and was facing a formidable enemy. The Wang family of Beihai had never seen such a big battle in recent decades. Lin Fengting was a little self-deprecating, a little melancholy, and a little sad. This was the Wang family of Beihai. Now there were only three of them. Flaming Fire was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. He was an expert in the dark world. Qin Weibai? All the intelligence agencies knew that Qin Weibai knew nothing about martial arts. It was self-evident who Mount Dibing was guarding against. They were guarding against him, the patriarch of the Lin clan. Lin Fengting didn't complain, he just felt a little helpless. Unlike the Jianghu, free and unrestrained. Once one entered the Jianghu, one's actions were beyond one's control. He really had no choice. "I'm the one who has dragged you down." Qin Weibai walked slowly along the mountain road, her voice soft. She was dressed very casually. She was wearing black wide-legged pants and very elegant sneakers. Her long hair was tied up, making her look like a graceful young married woman. There was not the slightest sharpness in her, only a very reserved elegance and calmness. "It's not a burden." Lin Fengting calmed himself down and shook his head. "Let's go up first." He was a friend of the Wang family of Beihai. At least it used to be. So he had the pass of Mount Dibing. It was not difficult for them to go up the mountain. Moreover, the Wang family of Beihai had never been afraid of others going up the mountain, whether they were friends or enemies. The master of Samsara Palace once led the 12 supermasters straight into Mount Dibing and escaped unscathed. That was because they quietly appeared in the core area of the top of the mountain, which also meant that the internal security forces of the Wang family of Beihai had hidden dangers. Moreover, Lin Fengting was also there at that time. Qin Weibai had also entered Mount Dibing alone and escaped unscathed. Wang Tianzong didn't kill him, except that deity of the purgatory of heaven capital and the master of Samsara Palace might have been around Mount Dibing at that time. The most important thing was that in the general trend, only killing Qin Weibai could hardly change anything. Now the three of them appeared above board, which meant that they had to face the entire defense system of Mount Dibing. Lin Fengting was at the peak of the invincible realm. But on Mount Dibing, which had been occupied by the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years, could the peak of the invincible realm go against the natural order? Lin Fengting didn't think so at all. You're gambling with your life. Lin Fengting suddenly smiled bitterly. Do you really think that Mount Dibbing without Wang Tianzong is not worth being afraid of? You sent someone to attack summer solstice successfully because it happened suddenly. Now Mount Dibbing is prepared. If the negotiation fails today, I may barely be able to leave, but I certainly can't take care of you. I never like to gamble. Qin Weibai whispered, I don't like to gamble with my life either. So once I gamble on the table, it is basically when I have absolute confidence. Do you know the trump card of the Wang family of Beihai? Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows. Even he didn't know the trump card of the Wang family of Beihai. I don't know. Qin Weibai shook her head and whispered, but I know their bottom line. So I just need to hold the trump card in my hand. The shadows of the trees on both sides of the road finally faded. The three of them officially stepped on the top of Mount Dibbing, which had almost no shadow in the sun. The top of the mountain was solemn. Countless armed elites of the internal security forces formed the tightest formation. Their momentum was vast and mighty, as if they were welcoming, but also as if they were guarding against them. Qin Weibai quietly walked through the crowd. The sun shone on her, and her whole body seemed to be shining. It was indescribable calmness and calmness. The crowd formed by the internal security forces spread to the center of the mountain. Qin Weibai walked along the crowd to the main hall in the center of the mountain, where all the power of the Wang family of Beihai was concentrated. The door of Emperor Hall was open. A tall young man with a perfect figure stood straight in front of the door. His appearance was gentle, and his figure was thin and slender. He stood quietly at the door, like a javelin standing upright in front of the door, fierce and sharp. This was a young man who looked thin but could easily give people a sense of power. The first disciple of the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. The combat capability of the invincible realm of the Wang family of Beihai, Dijiang. Dijiang looked at Qin Weibai. His gentle face was full of a sneer, and his eyes were as cold as ice. I want to see summer solstice. Qin Weibai glanced at Dijiang and said in a flat tone, What makes you think you can do that? Dijiang's tone was cold and almost feminine. He really didn't like this woman, and he especially couldn't stand her arrogance, which seemed to overlook all living beings at any time. He couldn't figure out why so many big shots in the dark world fell head over heels for this woman. Now that Samsara Palace and the Wang family of Beihai were hostile, he hated Qin Weibai even more. The master of Samsara Palace was dead. Why were you still so arrogant? The one beside you? Dijiang glanced at Lin Fengting. His eyes were a little complicated, and he bowed slightly to Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting nodded expressionlessly, but he felt a little emotional in his heart. Today, this young man with the combat capability of the invincible realm would have been taken to the Lin clan by him if he hadn't been accepted as a disciple by Wang Tianzong. I want to see summer solstice. Qin Weibai repeated her words again. What? Are you here to plead for Li Tianlan? Master is now in Huading, and no one can save Li Tianlan. Dijiang stood at the door and didn't move. I'm here today not to ask anyone, but I have something in my hand that summer solstice has to see me. I'll only wait for 3 minutes. If summer solstice doesn't come out, I'll leave. Qin Weibai's tone was light, but with a kind of obvious arrogance. Lin Fengting seemed to finally think of something. His face changed slightly, and he suddenly waved his hand. A streak of sword energy easily covered the space where he and Qin Weibai were, and everything outside began to blur. Lin Fengting looked at Qin Weibai and said softly, I probably know your trump card. Have you decided? This is the safest way, Qin Weibai said. She thought of Li Tianlan, who was still in Huading, and her eyes were gentle. It's just temporary. Lin Fengting said, if you keep this trump card in your hand, it can play a big role in the future. If you use it now, in half a year at most, the Wang family of Beihai will not be the Wang family of Beihai you are familiar with. It doesn't matter. Qin Weibai smiled. After half a year, Tianlan will no longer be the Tianlan that the Wang family of Beihai is familiar with. Or, they will have no chance to be familiar with anything by then. The sword intent began to melt gradually. Everything in Emperor Hall appeared in front of Qin Weibai again. A graceful and gentle beautiful woman in a cheongsam walked out of Emperor Hall. Di Jiang, who looked a little cold, bowed slightly to her. It's a pleasure to have friends coming from afar. Summer Solstice stood in front of Emperor Hall, looking at Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting. Her face was a little pale, but her smile was impeccable, so elegant, so calm. Li Tianlan quietly watched the video of Wang Tianzong's attack. It was different from the repeated studies of the superpowers. This meant that the video of the strongest combat capability in the dark world, the strongest sword. He only watched it once and then put it away. It was bright outside the window of Huading. Li Tianlan, who had been sleeping since he returned to East Emperor Palace from Dongshan, went downstairs with his mobile phone in his hand and silently adjusted his state. The final maneuver began at 9 o'clock in the morning. There were less than 3 hours left. He walked out of the gate, stood by the clear lake, looked into the distance, and didn't speak for a long time. Tianlan, are you okay? Yu Donglai quietly appeared beside Li Tianlan and handed him a cigarette. What can happen to me? Li Tianlan took the cigarette with a smile, but handed the mobile phone in his hand to Yu Donglai. Yu Donglai took the mobile phone and glanced at it. His pale eyebrows slightly raised. There was a text message on the mobile phone interface, which was extremely simple. I'm fine. My sister is also fine. Samsara Palace has turned from bright to dark. A text message from Little Bai. Yu Donglai chuckled. Li Tianlan nodded. He saw Qin Weibai's text message before watching the video. Therefore, the thrilling video didn't cause any waves for him. In addition to the pity for the fall of several supermasters of Samsara Palace, the most impressive thing in his mind was Wang Tianzong's earth-shattering sword. That was the peak sword intent in the world. That sword was very heavy. Li Tianlan suddenly said. What? Yu Donglai was a little stunned. Nothing. Li Tianlan shook his head. Rushi is still sleeping. I don't want to wait for her. After dinner, I'll go to the Sky Academy to participate in the maneuver. I'll send you there. Yu Donglai said without hesitation. He knew that his face was becoming less and less valuable, but he used to be the backbone of the Li family. Today's maneuver was very important to the Li family. How could he not be there? No need. Li Tianlan shook his head. I can go there by myself. A black Mercedes-Benz with a military plate slowly drove into East Emperor Palace. The Mercedes-Benz stopped in front of Li Tianlan and Yu Donglai, and the door opened. Dongqing Wudi, a giant of Zhongzhou State and the minister of the army headquarters, got out of the car calmly. He looked at Li Tianlan, who was a little surprised, and said with a smile, Where is Rushi? Tianlan, get ready. I'll send you to the Sky Academy in person. Marshal? Li Tianlan called him subconsciously. He knew that Dongqing Wudi would attend today's final maneuver, but he didn't expect that before the maneuver began, he would come to East Emperor Palace and send him there in person. Li Tianlan's mouth moved, but he didn't say anything. Don't think too much. Dongqing Wudi patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder. You just deal with the maneuver. I'll take care of the rest. How can it be so easy to solve? Li Tianlan laughed, but he did not laugh happily. His laughter was not happy, but with an obvious resentment. He knew what would happen in today's maneuver. He not only had to face the cooperation of several young chosen ones in Zhongzhou State. He even had to face the entire Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. How could it be so easy to solve? It doesn't matter. Dongqing Wudi said calmly, I'm here today to teach some people what national affairs are. What if some people insist on doing things their own way and ignore the overall situation? Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Wudi. Then F***K them. Dongqing Wudi suddenly laughed loudly and fiercely. If they don't want the overall situation, then I don't want it either. With his roaring laughter, the sun on the horizon kept rising, and the whole Huading became brighter and brighter. Dongqing Wudi looked at Yu Donglai, whose face gradually relaxed, and said with a chuckle, Senior Yu, I've long known the name of Yu's private home cuisine. After today's maneuver, I'll send Tianlan back. You have to cook a good meal for me. Yu Donglai laughed and seemed to be completely relaxed. Friends from afar, I'll cook in person today. At the same time, Huading railway station was crowded with people. 4 lengthened trains from different directions of Zhongzhou State slowly entered the platform of Huading in the roaring whistle. The train departed from Nanyun. The train departed from Beijiang. The train departed from Guangdong. The train departed from Tibet. The 4 lengthened trains, like 4 long dragons, slowly but firmly drove into Huading railway station. The moment the 4 trains stopped, the whole Zhongzhou State seemed to shake violently. The wind rose and the clouds moved. The storm was coming. Mount Dibing. Emperor Hall. The tea was still warm. Summer Solstice quietly looked at Qin Weibai, who sat opposite her and drank tea quietly. Flaming Fire quietly stood aside. Lin Fengting did not follow in. He asked. At this time, he was standing outside Emperor Hall and chatting with Dijiang. Do you know why I asked you to go up the mountain? Summer Solstice suddenly chuckled. Mount Dibing is not afraid of enemies coming up the mountain. But it has never welcomed them. Any threat that may destroy Mount Dibing is not welcome here. I know. Qin Weibai nodded. Because of Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting was at the peak of the invincible realm. But only those who really understood the past friendship and relationship between the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan knew. Since Lin Fengting was here, there would be no conflict on Mount Dibing today. Because the people of the Lin clan would not attack the Wang family of Beihai, at least not in the headquarters of the Wang family of Beihai. Summer Solstice coughed softly, picked up the teacup and took a sip. Qin Weibai looked at her pale face. Haven't your injuries stabilized after the last attack? She took the initiative to ask a question that seemed to be rude and provocative. Not bad. Summer Solstice said indifferently, You attacked me, didn't you? Qin Weibai nodded. What the hell do you want? Summer Solstice blinked and looked at Qin Weibai. Today is the final maneuver of the 2 academies. Qin Weibai said softly, I want Tianlan to live. It has nothing to do with you sending people to attack me. Summer Solstice looked at Qin Weibai's eyes. And can you really control today's situation? So what if you are here? Fengting is outside. Even if he will be persuaded by you to attack me, do you want to control me to threaten Tianzong? Even if I am injured, I am not completely helpless. And even if you are controlled, you will not compromise. Qin Weibai looked at Summer Solstice and whispered, Because some women would rather die than let their men be in trouble. Summer Solstice was silent. The look in her eyes became very fierce. The hostess who controls the Wang family of Beihai in Mount Dibing? I don't have such a stupid idea. I just want to show you something today. Qin Weibai reached out to Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire took out her bag and took out a very thick document from it. Qin Weibai put the document in front of Summer Solstice and whispered, You will be interested. The document was very thick, but the font was large, so there was not a lot of content. Summer Solstice glanced at it casually and suddenly noticed a few sensitive words. Her face suddenly changed, and her hand holding the teacup suddenly clenched. Qin Weibai looked at her quietly. Summer Solstice raised her head and stared at Qin Weibai's face. What is this? She asked word by word. The threat. Qin Weibai smiled sweetly. It's obvious. This is a threat to the Wang family of Beihai. Chapter 371. The maneuver of the 2 academies was little known. But it was definitely a big deal for Zhongzhou State. In the current situation of Zhongzhou State, not all geniuses could enter the 2 academies, but most geniuses had the experience of studying in the 2 academies. As time went on, each batch of graduates from the 2 academies would slowly grow up and eventually become the backbone of their respective regions and even the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. The first batch was Li Kuangtu, Gu Xingyun, and Wang Tianzong. The second batch was Gu Qianchuan, Dongqing Wudi, and Hua Qingfeng. The third batch was Situ Cangyue. Until now, among the graduates of the 2 academies, living or dead, there would be a very small number of people who would reach the top of the pyramid in Zhongzhou State, and more people would integrate into the special warfare system and become the cornerstone of Zhongzhou State. It was no exaggeration to say that any maneuver of the two academies might determine the pattern of the special warfare system of Xianxia state for the next decade or decades. This was especially true for this one. Li Tianlan with the combat capability of the invincible realm. Wang Shengxiao at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Gu Hanshan, who was only half a step away from Wang Shengxiao. Jiang Shangyu, who was low-key intolerant. Two of them had the wind and thunder veins, and one had the heavenly king heart. This could be said to be the most interesting final maneuver in the past 2 decades. It could even be said that whoever could win the first place in this maneuver was most likely to become the first person in Xianxia state for decades. This was also a maneuver that focused all the contradictions in Xianxia state. The Li family supported by the giant group. The southeast group supported Wang Shengxiao. The special warfare group supported Gu Hanshan. The academics and the prince group were caught in the middle with subtle attitudes. The north group remained neutral. There were too many possibilities for the result of this maneuver, but everyone believed that no matter what the result was, the entire Xianxia state would not be calm after today. Therefore, martial law was imposed in Huading a few days before the maneuver. The black Mercedes-Benz was driving on the road of Huading. The closer it was to the Sky Academy, the more lively the road became. There were no civilians within 2 kilometers of the Sky Academy. Soldiers, policemen, and plainclothes in camouflage uniforms could be seen almost everywhere. Through the window, Li Tianlan could almost clearly smell the solemn atmosphere in it. Dongqing Wudi sat on the other side of the back row of the car, silently looking at the scene outside the window with a calm expression. Dongqing Rushi sat in front of Li Tianlan and Dongqing Wudi, blinking her head and blinking her eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. It wasn't like this in previous years. Dongqing Wudi suddenly opened his mouth and said softly, "The scale of martial law at present is basically equivalent to the first level of alert. Even if there were maneuvers in previous years, they would not appear until the last stage. This year's maneuver was supposed to be very exciting, but because of some people's evil intentions, the maneuver has changed." Dongqing Wudi shook his head and continued, "What a strong start, but a weak finish." Li Tianlan calmly listened to Dongqing Wudi's evaluation. He knew very well what the other party meant, and the phrase, "strong start but weak finish," was even more vivid. Because Kunlun City directly changed the order of the maneuver. The first day of the maneuver was a team maneuver. What was a team maneuver? It was a maneuver for the teams of the 2 academies to show all their strength to the higher-ups of the 2 academies and Xianxia state after 3 years of training and cooperation. It was a rehearsal for a team to gain a foothold in Xianxia state in the future. In previous final maneuvers, the team maneuver could be said to be the essence and climax of the entire maneuver. But this time, Kunlun City put this part of the finale at the forefront. His goal was self-evident. This was not just about letting several teams unite to target Li Tianlan. It was also about not letting Li Tianlan know his opponents in advance through other maneuver subjects. Gu Xingyun is really considerate. Dongqing Wudi's eyes were a little cold, and there was a touch of undisguised contempt and mockery in his tone. Li Tianlan quietly looked at Dongqing Wudi's face. He could feel the other party's depression and anger, as well as the brutality and killing intent behind all the appearances. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little dazed. He suddenly thought of the mountain in Luojing, Zhongyu. He thought of the ancestral hall and villa on the mountain, the wind and the jungle on the mountain. He thought of Dongqing Hangguang, Dongqing Wudi by Qingqian, Dongqing Qiuqi, Dongqing Rushi, and Thunder God. Too many people. Too much kindness. The Dongqing clan seemed to really put everything in front of him. There was no malice, no conspiracy, no calculation, and they didn't even ask for anything in return. Li Tianlan knew what he might face in today's maneuver. Everyone knew it. Dongqing Wudi even knew it better than himself. So he appeared in East Emperor Palace, put on the marshal's uniform that meant power and majesty in Xianxia state, and wore all the medals that Xianxia state had awarded him over the years. Li Tianlan knew that the other party's attitude meant that the Dongqing clan would stand in front of him at all costs to face the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. At the juncture of his life and death, the Dongqing clan's clear attitude meant that they had no room for retreat. Why? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. He didn't call him marshal, and his expression didn't seem to have the respect and politeness of the past. It was just a little complicated. He had suspected the Dongqing clan's intentions and had been on guard. But now the whole Dongqing clan put everything on him, and even held its heart in front of him with both hands. This kindness and dedication were so strong. On guard? Vigilance? Li Tianlan suddenly didn't know what he should doubt. Dongqing Wudi's fingers trembled, and he turned his head and looked into Li Tianlan's eyes quietly. There was a very persistent light in Li Tianlan's eyes. The question was simple, but too broad. Dongqing Wudi didn't know what to say. He turned his head again and said with a forced smile, "How can there be so many whys? The engagement between you and Rushi is right here. When you get married in the future, as your son-in-law, I am your father. We are family. Do you still need to ask why?" Dongqing Rushi's eyes were clear. She reached out and pulled Li Tianlan's palm. Her face was a little red, but there was a touch of joy in her eyes. Just because of the engagement? Li Tianlan held Dongqing Rushi's small hand, but his eyes were fixed on Dongqing Wudi. It's also because of your potential. Dongqing Wudi subconsciously adjusted his sitting posture, took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep breath. His expression changed, and the meaning was hard to understand. Your performance is worth the family's investment. Tianlan, the engagement between you and Rushi was decided by the old master and senior Li when you were born. The family has never thought of breaking this agreement, so for the family, you are not an outsider, never. And your excellent performance is worthy of our investment in you. He held the cigarette tightly, and his fingers seemed to tremble because he used too much force. If you don't have the potential and the future to look forward to, you may have a different ending now. Rushi will still marry you. The family will give you a fortune that you can't spend in a lifetime, so that you can enjoy life in peace, not like this. Dongqing Wudi's eyes were a little dazed. He looked regretful, gratified, and extremely complicated. If this is the end, the Dongqing clan will slowly transform, gradually give up everything now, and develop its power from the military to the political world. Do you understand? Li Tianlan understood. But he didn't understand. What he understood was the future of the Dongqing clan. Dongqing Wudi had 2 daughters. The eldest daughter, Dongqing Qiuqi, was now one of the directors of Huading, or the path after the transformation of the Dongqing clan. If he had not appeared, or his potential was not as expected, the Dongqing clan would fully support Dongqing Qiuqi and make her a key figure in the transformation of the Dongqing clan. In other words, Dongqing Qiuqi represented a path that the Dongqing clan could choose in the future. However, the Dongqing clan did not pin their hopes on Dongqing Rushi. They pinned their hopes on Li Tianlan. Even if I don't appear, there is still Rushi. Li Tianlan whispered, Rushi's potential is not worth investing in? I can't. Dongqing Rushi shook her head honestly. I can't beat Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. And I can't beat Jiang Shangyu. She grabbed Li Tianlan's hand and felt a little sad. She thought that if she were stronger, would she not have to abstain from the final maneuver? Dongqing Wudi wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. You haven't answered my question. Li Tianlan didn't ask more, but held tightly to his original doubts. His question was about the Dongqing clan's kindness to him without asking for anything in return. Dongqing Wudi said a lot. But Li Tianlan didn't think that was the whole reason. Engagement. Potential. It could only be a part of the reason. Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly. This time, he was silent for a long time. The Sky Academy ahead was already in sight. The Dongqing clan owes you. Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi said slowly, you deserve everything today. Owes me? Or owes the Li family? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Dongqing Wudi was silent. Is that all? Li Tianlan continued to ask. Dongqing Wudi slowly turned his head and gazed deeply at Li Tianlan. His eyes were a little intense. It was a kind of intensity that all the emotions were about to rush out of his heart. But in the end, his intensity turned into retreat, and even into cowardice. He said, that's all. Li Tianlan said, oh, and stopped talking. The Mercedes-Benz drove directly into the campus along the temporarily opened road of the Sky Academy. Don't think too much. Dong Chengwudi looked at the crowd coming and going outside the window and said in a deep voice, "Concentrate on the maneuver. Tianlan, I promise you that no one can touch you with me here today. Just go ahead and do it." The Mercedes-Benz slowly stopped in the parking lot temporarily arranged by the Sky Academy. At the same time as the car stopped, another extended black Rolls-Royce drove over from the other direction and stopped next to the Mercedes-Benz. Both sides got out of the car and were stunned at the same time. There were 2 men and 1 woman in both cars. Dong Chengwudi, Li Tianlan, and Dong Chengrushi. The one who got out of the Rolls-Royce was Li Tianlan's biggest opponent today. Wang Shengxiao, who was a little pale, held Song Si's hand and stood behind Wang Tianzong. Dong Chengwudi and Wang Tianzong greeted each other with a smile and shook hands. Wang Shengxiao looked at Li Tianlan and nodded with a smile. He was very friendly. Li Tianlan did not look at Wang Shengxiao. He just looked at Wang Tianzong and said calmly, "Where is Yue Tong?" The Sword Emperor of Xianxia State, who was talking to Dong Chengwudi, turned his head and glanced at him. He just glanced at him casually. "You will see her." Wang Tianzong said calmly, "After today." He spoke very slowly, so the last 4 words were particularly meaningful. Dong Chengwudi's eyes tightened. Li Tianlan's face did not change at all. He believed in Dong Chengwudi's promise just now. But he also believed in Wang Tianzong's strength. Today, if the Sword Emperor of Xianxia State wanted to kill someone, no one in the whole Xianxia State, even the whole Dark World, could stop him. The sword edge of the Sword Emperor was enough to tear any solid guarantee. Li Tianlan was neither sad nor happy nor afraid. For the worst result, he had been mentally prepared before Dong Chengwudi appeared in front of him. He might die today. But when he died, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Tianzong's most valued son, was bound to go with him. The Li family was stubborn. Chapter 372. Dong Chengwudi didn't seem to hear Wang Tianzong's meaningful words. He kept smiling and moved forward leisurely. Wang Tianzong didn't look at Li Tianlan again. He walked side by side with Dong Chengwudi and chatted casually. One was the Sword Emperor of Xianxia State who influenced the national situation with the power of a clan. The other was the commander-in-chief of Xianxia State who had fought for many years and whose influence covered the whole army. They didn't have a deep friendship, but they were not strangers either. When they walked together, they didn't feel embarrassed because they couldn't find a topic. Dong Chengwudi casually mentioned 2 military projects that the Dongqing clan was currently studying. Wang Tianzong said with a smile that he would go back and ask someone to sort out the relevant information. In a few words, the cooperation of the project had been finalized. 2 young couples followed behind them in silence. This strange scene was seen by more and more people, and everyone had a strange look in their eyes. The 2 big shots in Xianxia State were likely to fall out today. The 2 young heavenly sons who were about to win or even die. They were still talking and laughing together when the maneuver was about to begin? Such a scene was really a little strange. The position of the team maneuver was near the 3rd stand of the training ground. The Sky Academy once again set up the exaggeratedly huge screen. All the equipment was connected normally. Before the maneuver personnel entered, the screen was silently playing the internal scene of the maneuver area over and over again. The team maneuver had always been the most important part of the final maneuver, so the maneuver area was very large. It extended from the front of the 3rd stand and entered the edge of the dense forest behind the screen, which was equivalent to officially entering the maneuver area. The terrain of this area with a radius of about 2 kilometers was not complicated, but it was extremely rich, including dense forests, pools, undulating terrain, abandoned teaching buildings, and a dilapidated warehouse. When Li Tianlan walked to the 3rd stand, all the elites of the 2 academies who participated in the maneuver today stood in front of the big screen and carefully observed the situation in the maneuver area. Li Tianlan counted and slightly twitched the corner of his mouth. A week ago, when Gu Xingyun held a forum, it was confirmed that there were 12 teams participating in the maneuver. But today, there were only 7 in the maneuver site. Among them were East Emperor Palace, Phantom Palace, 3000 World, and Jilei Mountain. In other words, after he seriously injured Gu Qianchuan and showed the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, there were only 3 teams from the 2 academies who were willing to advance and retreat with Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan. They were destined to be a loyal force of the other party, and there was no possibility of them changing sides. I saw a few friends. I'm going to take a look. When he was about to walk to the 3rd stand, Wang Tianzong suddenly smiled. Wudi, see you later. See you later. Dongqing Wudi nodded calmly. The moment the 6 people were about to go their separate ways, Wang Shengxiao, who had been silent, suddenly reached out to Li Tianlan. You are very strong. He looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and said, I'm probably not your match right now. But in today's maneuver, we still have a chance of winning. Be careful. Wang Tianzong paused. He did not turn around or speak. Li Tianlan looked into Wang Shengxiao's eyes. His eyes were very calm, and even had a trace of regret. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. He didn't feel bad for Wang Tianzong, but he didn't like him either. But somehow, he appreciated the next patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Perhaps it was because of the other party's frankness. Li Tianlan reached out and held Wang Shengxiao's hand. Wang Shengxiao's palms slightly tightened and he said calmly, I'm sorry for not being able to have a fair fight with you. I'm sorry for you and myself. But how can everything go well in Jianghu? From where I stand, I owe you an apology. From the standpoint of the Wang family of Beihai, I will do whatever it takes. He let go of his hand. You won't win today. Next year, I'll toast you a glass of good wine. He took Song Ci and turned around without looking back. See you in the maneuver. Wang Tianzong moved forward in silence. Wang Shengxiao and Song Ci followed in silence. If it weren't for the fact that our positions are destined to be hostile, he should be the kind of person you admire the most, right? Wang Tianzong suddenly broke the silence and said slowly, if his surname wasn't Li, wouldn't he be the kind of person you admire the most? Wang Shengxiao smiled. What a pity. Wang Tianzong said. Wang Shengxiao nodded. What a pity. The backs of the 3 people were getting farther and farther in Li Tianlan's sight. Li Tianlan calmly withdrew his gaze and looked at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi stared blankly at Wang Tianzong's back without saying a word. He and Wang Tianzong talked a lot, but it seemed that they talked about nothing. From beginning to end, he never mentioned today's final maneuver. Wang Tianzong didn't mention it either. Obviously, Sword Emperor had made up his mind. When he, the giant of Zhongzhou State and the #1 person in the army headquarters, personally brought Li Tianlan to the maneuver site, Wang Tianzong still didn't intend to give him, the minister, any face. Since he had made up his mind, it was useless to say anything. Tianlan, don't be careless. Dongqing Wudi said slowly, Wang Shengxiao is not talking big. Li Tianlan certainly knew the truth of Wang Shengxiao's words. The combat capability of the Invincible Realm was not really invincible. Even if it was the real Invincible Realm, few people dared to say that they were really invincible. Wang Shengxiao, Gu Hanshan, and Jiang Shangyu, any one of them alone would not be his opponent. But today, it was a team fight. 3 geniuses with combat capability far beyond their realm joined forces, which might not be worse than the combat capability of the Invincible Realm. If this maneuver was really a maneuver that would be lost, Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan would have given up long ago. I understand. Li Tianlan nodded. The little guy from the Wang family of Beihai is not bad. Dongqing Wudi smiled. I don't mean his apology to you. I mean standing in his position, he can admit that he is not as good as you. With this kind of mind, he is much better than the little bastard of Kunlun City. Tianlan, I appreciate him, but in this maneuver, the enemy is clear. Don't hold back. How come? Li Tianlan smiled. He knew better than Dongqing Wudi what this maneuver meant for himself and the Li family. They won. From now on, the Li family would usher in a real opportunity to rise. If they lost, even if the Li family was not doomed, the situation would be extremely bad. This maneuver was key for Zhongzhou State and also for the Li family. Otherwise, Li Tianlan would not have participated in this maneuver with the intention of destroying indiscriminately, knowing that he was likely to face the entire Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. If his surname is not Wang, maybe you will be good friends. Dongqing Rushi took Li Tianlan's hand and whispered, just like Lin Fengting, Li Beitin and others. Li Tianlan reached out and touched Dongqing Rushi's long hair, saying softly, "How can there be so many ifs?" The three of them walked to the number 3 stand of the training ground under everyone's gaze. The stand was already full of people. People from all walks of Zhongzhou State who were qualified to appear here had already appeared. Li Tianlan saw several familiar faces, and they were all sitting very close to the front. There were enemies and friends. Zhuang Huayang, the principal of the Sky Academy. Zhong Yue, the top leader of Huading. Yi Fengqing, the director of Huading's Special Operations Bureau. Zhang Qi, the director of the Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters. Lu Shuyuan, the director of the Curtain Intelligence Department of Huading, the boss of the Blue Sky Group. Han Donglu, the chairman of the board of directors of Xianxia Group, and Han Xinyan. Zhang Holong, whom he had seen several times, sat between an elegant couple, smiling and waving at him. Lu Shuanghua, the intelligence organization of the Wang family of Beihai, sat quietly. Wang Zhaoyang, the commander of the Shadow Sting Force, the largest special forces in Zhongzhou State, looked serious. Li Tianlan also accidentally saw Wu Jingmin, the new deputy prime minister of Zhongzhou State, who represented the cabinet to attend the final maneuver. Gu Xingyun, who was a little pale, sat in the center and looked at Li Tianlan with indifferent eyes. Political bigwigs, military strongmen, intelligence elites, patriarchs of wealthy families, and giants of special warfare. They gathered here. Li Tianlan also saw more people he did not know. Everyone came here with their own plans and purposes. Wu Jingmin came here on behalf of the Zhongzhou state government. The principle of the Zhongzhou State Party commanding the gun had not changed for hundreds of years. The gun naturally represented the army headquarters. Therefore, after the formal formation of the special warfare system, this system, which could be on the same level as the army headquarters but was more secretive, was directly responsible to the government. Wu Jingmin's appearance here meant that the government was always paying attention to the changes of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. The presence of military generals here was not very welcome. These strong men, who were destined to fight for talents with the special warfare system, did not seem to care much about the eyes of their colleagues in the special warfare system. The patriarchs of wealthy families came here for investment. Every team participating in today's maneuver was likely to become a behemoth that could control the situation of Zhongzhou State in the next 10 or even decades. A correct investment could often become the key to making one's family more prosperous many years later. Therefore, after the maneuver, these wealthy families would be the most active in contacting with the major teams. The intelligence elites sat here for a relatively simple purpose. In addition to finding out the talents they needed, the maneuver they watched was a kind of intelligence in itself. The special warfare system was a force that had to participate. Because the maneuver of the two academies was an internal affair of the special warfare system, Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State, had to come even if he did not want to. When Dongqing Wudi walked up to the stands, everyone in the stands stood up to greet him. After all, in any case, Dongqing Wudi was the highest-ranking tycoon who attended the maneuver. He was the minister of the army headquarters and the actual leader of nearly 5 million troops in Zhongzhou State. Although he ranked third among the 9 tycoons in Zhongzhou State, when the international situation was tense, the strength and power of this position were even above that of the prime minister. This was the real power to the extreme, and people could not help but respect and even awe him. Dongqing Wudi shook hands with everyone one by one and introduced Li Tianlan to everyone at the same time. Everyone could feel Dongqing Wudi's seriousness and solemnity. So everyone looked at Li Tianlan with more and more complicated eyes. It was a kind of forcibly changed kindness, softness, and emotion. They all knew what would happen in today's final maneuver. If Li Tianlan could not defeat the joint forces of several heavenly sons, he was bound to be killed in the maneuver area. But if he won, he was very likely to face the sword of Sword Emperor and the killing intent of Kunlun City. No one was optimistic about Li Tianlan. He was a heavenly son. He was the most amazing genius in Xianxia state in recent decades. Despite his outstanding aptitude, he did not have a terrifying enough background. The Li family had made a comeback. But the Li family's current strength was still weak. Everyone thought that Li Tianlan would definitely die today. Especially after learning that Dongqing Rushi also gave up participating in the maneuver. But now Dongqing Wudi directly overturned everyone's inner speculation. He took Li Tianlan to the stands and seriously introduced the heavenly son of the Li family to everyone. His intention and formality could clearly make everyone feel his firmness and determination. Combined with Zhou Yuanshan's transfer to Xianxia some time ago. Everyone knew that the Dongqing clan had completely regarded Li Tianlan as the core figure in their future development. Zhou Yuanshan, Dongqing Qiuqi, and Dongqing Rushi were all operating around Li Tianlan. In the next few decades of development, the Dongqing clan had clearly regarded Li Tianlan as their new core. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City wanted to kill Li Tianlan. The military giants protected Li Tianlan to the death. No matter what the result was, at least Li Tianlan was no longer a heavenly son with only talent but no background. The Dongqing clan might be a little worse than Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai. But Li Tianlan was definitely stronger than Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. So complementary. Dongqing Wudi finally walked to Gu Xingyun. His Highness the God of War of Xianxia state was pale, but at this time there was a strange cyan color on his face, as if he was trying to suppress his anger. He saw Dongqing Wudi introducing Li Tianlan to everyone meticulously. This was not the so-called useless effort. This was completely putting pressure on the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. The Dongqing clan had been vaguely supporting Li Tianlan before, but now they stood up completely and completely protected Li Tianlan under their wings. Killing Li Tianlan was bound to make a deadly feud with the Dongqing clan. It didn't matter what Li Tianlan's surname was. What mattered was that he would become the core of the next generation of the Dongqing clan. Just like Gu Hanshan's status in Kunlun City and Wang Xingxiao's status in the Wang family of Beihai. If they killed Li Tianlan at this time, it was not surprising that the Dongqing clan would react. Gu Xingyun kept breathing deeply. His injury was far from recovering, and his chest was full of pain when he breathed. He silently gritted his teeth and looked at Dongqing Wudi in front of him. He was sitting. Dongqing Wudi was standing. So Gu Xingyun had to look up. The sunlight after the rain shone down from the sky and fell on Dongqing Wudi. His body was covered with medals issued by Xianxia state, symbolizing all the honor and courage of a soldier. The medals were shining in the sun, a little dazzling. Gu Xingyun narrowed his eyes, held Dongqing Wudi's outstretched hand, and said calmly, "Marshal, you are really different today." Indeed. Dongqing Wudi let go of his hand and sat casually beside Gu Xingyun. "I'm a little strange to myself, not to mention others. I even forget the origins of many medals. I'm like this. I'm afraid others have long forgotten, right?" Gu Xingyun slowly withdrew his palm, gently clenched it into a fist, and said with a smile, "How could it be? Xianxia state will definitely remember the achievements of Xianxia state. You are a hero, and Xianxia state can't forget it. I dare not forget it." "Hero?" Dongqing Wudi shook his head with a smile and handed Gu Xingyun a cigarette. "I don't like to be a hero. It seems that heroes are good-tempered and can tolerate some clowns jumping around in front of them. I have a bad temper, and I think everyone knows that. But it turns out that even if some people don't forget my contributions, they forget my temper." Dongqing Wudi looked at Gu Xingyun with soft eyes. "Xingyun, do you think I've killed too few people?" His voice was very light. But his voice was like a line of soldiers piercing the midsummer sun, making all the people nearby who heard this subconsciously shiver. Xianxia state's god of massacre. How could he kill too few people? Gu Xingyun's body stiffened for a moment, and then he calmly said, "Marshal, you must be joking." Dongqing Wudi chuckled and quietly changed the subject. "How's your injury? You were attacked these days, and Xianxia state is very lively. I approved several documents about finding the murderer in the army headquarters. How about it? Do you have any clues about the murderer now?" Gu Xingyun's elegant and pale face did not change at all, but a cold light flashed in his eyes. He stared straight at Li Tianlan in front of him and said expressionlessly, "There are no clues for the time being. But I believe that no matter who the murderer is, he won't live long." At this moment, Gu Xingyun thought of the scene when Dongqing Wudi introduced Li Tianlan to everyone just now. Such a move was to put pressure on Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai. But wasn't this a kind of provocation? The Wang family of Beihai never retreated in the face of provocation. Was Kunlun City going to retreat? But today, he was not the only one who came to the Sky Academy. There was also Li Shi hiding in the dark. Gu Xingyun straightened up, looked at Dongqing Wudi's eyes, and said blandly, "I guess he won't live past today." "Really?" Dongqing Wudi looked at Gu Xingyun's eyes for a long time, and then he asked lightly. Without waiting for Gu Xingyun's answer, he nodded directly to Li Tianlan and said gently, "Tianlan, you go first. Just focus on the maneuver and leave other things to me." Li Tianlan nodded and turned around gently. He seemed to be still in the same place when he turned around. But the next second, his whole body had appeared in front of the big screen under the high platform. Like a ghost. The clear afterimage dissipated in a scream. Gu Xingyun's face twitched again. Dongqing Wudi stopped talking and just quietly looked at the screen under the platform. By introducing Li Tianlan to everyone, he had shown his final attitude. This was also the last fight. Until now, Dongqing Wudi still hoped that this matter could end in the rules of balance and compromise. This was more in line with the overall situation of Zhongzhou State. He did what he could. But he didn't know whether the Wang family of Beihai could see the so-called overall situation. Kunlun City could see the overall situation, but it didn't want to care. Li Tianlan, who had grown up, almost made it lose its mind with fear. As for Wang Tianzong, he didn't want to see the so-called overall situation at all. Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State slowly walked up to the high platform before the maneuver began and sat next to Gu Xingyun in the greetings along the way. Dongqing Wudi, Gu Xingyun, and Wang Tianzong. The three giants all looked calm but determined. Dongqing Wudi suddenly laughed at himself. He seemed to relax and slowly leaned against the chair behind him. Chapter 373. This is the second update. There was one update a minute ago. Don't miss it. 9 o'clock. The maneuver officially began. Zhuang Huayang, president of the Sky Academy, and Qin Songlin, president of the Deep Sea Academy, made the opening remarks of the maneuver on behalf of the two academies. Zhuang Huayang, dressed in a suit, held a microphone in his hand, smiled peacefully, but his eyes were full of worry. He looked at Dongqing Wudi, took a deep breath, and said slowly, "Everyone, first of all, let's welcome, boom." The opening remarks of the maneuver were completely interrupted after just a few words. A deafening roar rang out without any warning, shaking the heavens and earth. A cannonball burning with black smoke and dragging waves of fire rose into the air in everyone's astonished gaze, and finally smashed into a teaching building of the Sky Academy. The seemingly old but extremely strong teaching building shook violently under the bombardment of the cannonball. Countless glasses were broken into pieces, and the whole building collapsed with smoke and dust in the loud bang. Dust flew everywhere. This shot was enough to explain one thing. The cannonball that smashed the whole teaching building was a real one. If this sudden shot fell on the stands, the consequences would be unimaginable. Countless people turned their heads subconsciously and looked around. What the hell is going on? Yi Fengqing, the director of Huading's Special Operations Bureau, who was sitting behind Dongqing Wudi, suddenly stood up. In his sight, an endless long line suddenly appeared on all the roads of the Sky Academy. The army in camouflage seemed to be pouring into the Sky Academy endlessly. Silence. They marched firmly toward the training ground of the Sky Academy. Yi Fengqing was dazzled in front of him. He could not determine how many people there were in this army for a moment. 10,000? 20,000? Or 30,000? The dense army occupied every corner of the Sky Academy. Yi Fengqing suddenly rose into the air, stood on a high place, and looked out of the Sky Academy. Boom! Another violent rumble rang out. The The cannonball burning with black smoke once again smashed into the Sky Academy. This time, it fell near the training ground. The crowd was in a complete uproar. Yi Fengqing, standing on a high place, also saw the other side of the river. In his sight, countless armored vehicles and tanks were neatly arranged by the river, and countless barrels were aimed at the Sky Academy. On the other side of the river, there were still soldiers getting out of the car and rushing into the Sky Academy along the bridge and road. Yi Fengqing's heart sank. He was known as a madman, but at this moment, his whole body was ice cold. Countless soldiers began to rush into the training ground. Everyone was armed to the teeth and armed with live ammunition. More and more soldiers rushed into the training ground. A row, a patch, a square formation. The square formation slowly moved forward, growing larger and larger. However, the formation was not chaotic at all. It was strict and orderly. Gu Xingyun looked at this scene in a daze. At this moment, because of his injuries, he could be said to be in the weakest state of his life. Weakness could naturally affect his mental state. At this moment, as he looked at the increasingly large phalanx of troops, he stood rooted to the ground, unable to speak for a long time. The Sky Academy finally reacted. The big screen that was playing the maneuver area switched directly to the scene of the entire Sky Academy. In an instant, everyone saw the scene inside and outside the Sky Academy. The army. Weapons. Other than the army, there were only weapons. More and more armored vehicles and tanks lined up along the river. Some soldiers even set up rocket launchers nearby. More and more soldiers seemed to have no end at all. They rushed into the Sky Academy like a raging tide and a big wave. A large number of people began to gather at the training ground. A small number of elites occupied the arsenal of the Sky Academy for the first time. The people who guarded the arsenal were naturally experts. But in the face of such a large number of Zhongzhou state troops, they could not react at all. When they were hesitating whether to take action, they were directly overwhelmed by the rushing army. The arsenal was completely lost. So more main battle tanks and armored vehicles rushed out of the arsenal than on the other side of the river and rampaged through the entire Sky Academy. There was a buzzing sound in the base of the Sky Academy. Armed helicopters appeared at a low altitude and flew slowly. More advanced fighter jets rushed into the sky and rotated at a high altitude. Some professionals entered the missile center. In less than 10 minutes, the control of the launchable missiles in the Sky Academy had fallen into their hands. Boom! The third cannon sounded in the Sky Academy. The shell passed through the training ground of the Sky Academy and fell straight into the villa in the center of the academy. That was where Zhuang Huayang lived and worked. The whole villa exploded in an instant. In a mess, stones were flying everywhere, and the surrounding flowers and running water were completely gone. Zhuang Huayang did not panic or get angry. He held the microphone, and there was only amazement and a bitter smile on his face. But except for him, most of the people present were in a great panic and dignified state. This is the latest armor-piercing shell developed by the Dongqing clan. It has just served in Zhongzhou state for less than 3 months and is given priority to the Border Praetorian Corps. Its code name is Wolf Smoke. Its explosive power is about 5 times that of ordinary shells, and the explosion range is about 3 times that of ordinary shells. With less than 200 Wolf Smoke shells, artillery fire can easily cover the entire Sky Academy. Tianzong, what do you think? In the panic, Dongqing Wudi's voice sounded unhurriedly. He was not asking Gu Xingyun. He was asking Wang Tianzong. In an instant, Wang Tianzong did not respond, but everyone who heard this sentence nearby looked at Dongqing Wudi in disbelief. Countless troops gathered under the stage, almost filling the entire training ground. As far as the eye could see, there was a dense army, with no end in sight. Dongqing Wudi looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. Wang Tianzong's expression was still calm. He just nodded and said, "It's okay. I think it's okay too." Dongqing Wudi smiled and stood up directly in the front row. At the front of the square formation under the stage stood 4 fierce generals. The moment Dongqing Wudi stood up, the 4 stood at attention and saluted at the same time. Their eyes were so fanatical. Their voices were hoarse. Li Zhonghu of the Blood Battalion of the Border Control Corps pays respect to the Marshal. Sun Mengran of the Pegasus Battalion of the Border Control Corps pays respect to the Marshal. Wu Junyu of the Black Dragon King of the Border Control Corps pays respect to the Marshal. Guan Xianxia of the Wild Sand Battalion of the Border Control Corps pays respect to the Marshal. Their voices were high and loud, as if they were roaring from the depths of their souls. Almost everyone present had heard of their names. They might not be as famous as the 4 famous generals under Dong Chengwudi's command, but in their respective legions, they were well-deserved backbone generals. Dong Chengwudi looked at them silently. He took a deep breath and raised his hand to salute. In an instant, thousands or tens of thousands of troops under the stage raised their hands to salute at the same time. This was an indescribable power. Tens of thousands of people raised their hands at the same time, and there seemed to be a storm in the whole training ground. The air was oppressive and suffocating. Only tens of thousands of soldiers raised their hands and looked at their marshal with fanatical faces. Dong Chengwudi. Gu Xingyun finally reacted. His face turned red and even a little purple in an instant. No matter what all this meant today, Dong Chengwudi mobilized troops into the Sky Academy and destroyed the maneuver of the Special Warfare System, which was tantamount to slapping Gu Xingyun in the face. His face was completely distorted in an instant. He struggled to stand up and pointed at Dong Chengwudi. "What do you want to do? Mobilizing the elites of the Border Control Corps without permission? Are you crazy? Do you know what you're doing?" "I don't know." Dong Chengwudi slowly turned around, and his eyes were full of mockery. "But I know what I want to do." He stood on the stage with a calm expression, but his voice shook the sky and echoed over the whole training ground. "I don't care what bullshit rules you have. Today, I'm here and my army is here. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I don't want anyone to hurt the people I care about. The maneuver can continue, but Tianlan must be alive. Today, I'll make it clear that whoever dares to hurt Tianlan, I'll dare to kill him." His eyes swept over Gu Xingyun, Wang Tianzong, and even Gu Hanshan and Wang Shengxiao under the stage. Gu Xingyun trembled in anger. "Do you want to commit treason? Bastard! You want to commit treason with the Border Control Corps?" He suddenly looked at the square formation under the stage and said angrily, "Are you going to betray Zhongzhou State with this madman? Betray Zhongzhou State?" Dong Chengwudi's voice suddenly rose. He suddenly reached out and pulled his clothes, and all the medals flew directly into the sky. He reached out and pointed. The sword intent surged, and a medal suddenly lit up in the dim blue electric light. The national medal. More than 20 years ago, the Li family changed dramatically. Heng State and Annan State joined forces to invade Zhongzhou State. Li Kuangtu died, and the 120,000 troops of the Border Control Corps were almost wiped out. In that battle, I took 6,000 people of the Border Control Corps to kill 10,000 Supermaster Army of Annan State and 3 large mercenary groups. My 6,000 people. I had over 20 wounds on my body in exchange for this medal. He pointed his palm again, and another medal lit up. 19 years ago, an important person in Zhongzhou State who had a close relationship with Kunlun City committed treason and fled to Heng State. I personally led the team and went 800 miles into Heng State and finally completed the beheading task. In that battle, more than 1,500 people of the Thunderbolt Battalion died. I was in a coma for 3 months, in exchange for this medal of courage. 15 years ago, Night Spirit invaded Zhongzhou State. I personally took my brothers and dragged Sky Spirit, an invincible realm expert of Night Spirit, to a small town in Nanyang. In the end, I got killed by the human emperor. In that battle, 800 people of the Border Control Corps became martyrs and became this medal of blood. 10 years ago, the rout of Rant's team lurking back to Zhongzhou State from Snow Country was exposed. The Black Dragon Army lost 2 divisions overnight and successfully supported Rant's team to return home. In that battle, the former commander of the Black Dragon Army, my brother Lin Yuetong, sacrificed himself to cover me. His body has not been found yet, so I got this Medal of Fortitude. 3 years ago, the 5 superpowers joined forces with Annan State to invade the border. More than half of the Thunderbolt Battalion was lost, and the Blood Battalion lost more than 8,000 people. The Border Control Corps collectively made first-class meritorious service, and the President personally awarded me the Red Star Medal. Dong Chengwudi's voice kept rising, echoing on the training ground like thunder. Every one of my 22 medals was exchanged with the lives of the Border Control Corps. I've been in charge of the Border Control Corps for more than 20 years, participated in 36 wars, and killed more than 100,000 enemies. What did I get in exchange for that? In exchange for hundreds of scars on my body, the sacrifice of tens of thousands of my soldiers, and these more than 20 medals. This is what the Border Control Corps and I have done for Xianxia State. Treason? Gu Xingyun, I and my soldiers are standing here now. Do you dare to face these medals and say that the Border Control Corps is going to commit treason? Gu Xingyun's lips trembled violently, and his face was livid. Tens of thousands of troops in the phalanx raised their guns at the same time and roared. Enough! Wang Tianzong, who had been silent, suddenly whispered. Dong Chengwudi narrowed his eyes and looked at Wang Tianzong, who still looked indifferent. How many people? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. Not many. Dong Chengwudi said calmly, 40,000 people. Not many indeed. Wang Tianzong nodded. If I want to kill him, 40,000 people can't stop me. You can try. Dong Chengwudi sneered. 40,000 elites in the chi-controlling realm. Most of them may have no hope of breaking through the ice-condensing realm in their lives, but you are the Sword Emperor. Can you really break the domain formed by 40,000 people at the same time? Are you forcing me to take action? Wang Tianzong looked at Dong Chengwudi. I'm just teaching you what the overall situation is. If you dare to move today, 40,000 people can appear here. In 3 days, 400,000 troops can appear in Mount Dibing. Even if I can't defeat your Beihai Corps, can I destroy your nest? 40,000 people can't stop you, but if you move today, the Dongqing clan will fight you to the end at all costs. Dong Chengwudi's eyes were calm and crazy. He looked at Wang Tianzong and said word by word, even if my family is ruined. You're not afraid, so are they? Wang Tianzong's body seemed to shake, and then he sneered. Dong Chengwudi suddenly laughed wildly. He pointed to the 40,000 troops below the platform and laughed wildly. I believe in the strength of your Sword Emperor. But the 40,000 people here are all excellent soldiers who have risked their lives for Xianxia State. They stand here today. Even if they don't move, Wang Tianzong, you can kill them all, but how many do you dare to kill? The Sword Emperor drew his sword and slaughtered the soldiers of Xianxia State. He might still be the Sword Emperor, but he could never be the Sword Emperor of Xianxia State again. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes tightly and remained silent. Dong Chengwudi didn't wait for others to test his determination. He suddenly turned around, looked at the platform below, and said in a loud voice, I'm Dong Chengwudi, your marshal, but what I say now is not an order. Now, I need someone to stand here and die for me. Who dares to die in the Border Control Corps? The silence lasted only a few seconds. The next moment, 40,000 people raised their guns without hesitation and aimed at Wang Tianzong. Their eyes were fixed on Dong Chengwudi, the invincible marshal in their hearts. It was a kind of almost irrational fanaticism and madness. I'm willing to die for the marshal. The uniform roar went straight to the sky, and the wind and clouds changed color. At this moment, in the face of the killing intent and will of 40,000 people, even the Sword Emperor of Xianxia State seemed to have no momentum at all. Gu Xingyun slowly slumped into his chair. His face was livid. He gritted his teeth and said, Dong Chengwudi, you broke the rules. You must pay the price. But Dong Chengwudi spat at Gu Xingyun and said with a grim smile, Fuck you. Chapter 374. Everyone knew that this final maneuver would not end peacefully. However, no one could have imagined that the scene would be so explosive. He was willing to die for the marshal. This was not a slogan. This was the soul of the entire Border Praetorian Corps. No one would doubt their determination. As long as Wang Tianzong dared to draw his sword, 40,000 people, 40,000 of the most elite troops of the Border Control Corps, would definitely charge at the so-called Sword Emperor of Xianxia state without hesitation until all of them died in battle. The standing minister of the army headquarters of Xianxia state. The governor of Kunlun city. The patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. It was the first time that the three giants, who could be said to be standing at the peak of Xianxia state, put their conflicts in front of everyone so fiercely. The three of them seemed to have no way out. But once they took another step forward, they would truly fight to the death. No one was willing to bear the consequences. Wang Tianzong looked at Dongqing Wudi quietly. Dongqing Wudi looked at Gu Xingyun with a ferocious smile. Gu Xingyun looked at Wang Tianzong with a livid face. The situation was subtle and deadlocked. The others sat in their seats with cold bodies, not even daring to breathe. No room for negotiation? After a long time, Wang Tianzong took the initiative to break the silence. What do you think? Dongqing Wudi glanced at him. His expression had already become calm, but his eyes still flickered with an extraordinary divine light. As the standing minister of the army headquarters of Xianxia state, he naturally had the power to transfer troops. But he transferred 40,000 of the most elite soldiers from the four armies of the Border Control Corps to Huading and directly surrounded the Sky Academy. While declaring force, Dongqing Wudi also mercilessly trampled on the rules. No matter what the result was, Dongqing Wudi had to pay the price afterward. He had taken a huge risk to get to this point. What other choice did he have? Wang Tianzong's eyes swept over Dongqing Wudi and fell on the endless 40,000 troops under the platform. The army stood motionless in absolute silence. Wang Tianzong looked at them one by one. From their eyes, he saw only unshakable toughness and persistence. A soldier should be like that. Such was the spirit of a soldier. The Border Control Corps was known as the most elite large corps in Xianxia state. And these 40,000 people could be said to be the most elite in the entire Border Control Corps. 40,000 soldiers, the weakest of whom were in the chi-controlling realm. Dongqing Wudi was right. Wang Tianzong was invincible in the world and ranked first on the divine list. He could kill 40,000 people. It could be killed. But he didn't dare to kill them. Sword Emperor's sword was aimed at the most elite warriors of Xianxia state. Even if he only killed one person, under the watchful eyes of the public, it was treason. Absolute martial strength, deep foundation, and super strength could represent many things. But it couldn't really replace everything. Even Wang Tianzong had to abide by the rules. If he made a mistake, he had to pay the price. If he pulled out his sword today, Li Tianlan would definitely die. But in the face of the counterattack of the entire 40,000 troops, Wang Tianzong could not leave Huading unscathed without killing a single person, even if he was an immortal. If it really came to that, the Dongqing clan, which had already announced in front of everyone, would have no way out. While announcing the Wang family of Beihai's treason, the Dongqing clan was bound to mobilize all its troops to fight the Wang family of Beihai to the death. The Border Control Corps faced the Beihai Corps. The internal strife in Xianxia state and the civil strife in Eastern Europe would take the opportunity to cover Xianxia state, and the overall situation would collapse. At that time, the Dongqing clan would be ruined, which was the price the Dongqing clan had to pay regardless of the overall situation. But at that time, even if the Dongqing clan was destroyed, the Wang family of Beihai would not be much better. The Wang family of Beihai might become the next Li family, even more tragic than the Li family in those days. Wang Tianzong had a headache. At this moment, he finally found that Li Tianlan had become one of the most sensitive figures in Xianxia state. He affected the Dongqing clan. But the Dongqing clan could affect the general trend. Dongqing Wudi's strength was insignificant in Wang Tianzong's eyes. With his aptitude, it was not difficult for him to enter the invincible realm. But as he just said, over the years, countless wars and countless serious injuries had already worn out Dongqing Wudi's potential. The potential that was enough for him to enter the invincible realm had turned into more than 20 medals. Now Dongqing Wudi was in the half-step invincible realm. With Wang Tianzong's strength, he could kill him with one sword stroke. The problem was that Dongqing Wudi's strength was insignificant, but his identity made even Wang Tianzong feel pressure when facing him. He was one of the 9 directors of the Zhongzhou Decision-Making Committee, ranked 3rd, and the standing minister of the army headquarters. He was the actual supreme leader of millions of troops in Zhongzhou state, including the Navy, Army, and Air Force, plus the Special Forces. If it was during the war, Dong Qingwudi's power could be said to be second only to the president. He was the real number 2 figure in Zhongzhou state. Even in peacetime, his status was second only to the president and the prime minister. Kill him with one sword stroke? No matter how crazy Wang Tianzong was, he would not have such an idea. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and glanced at Gu Xingyun calmly. He had already begun to calculate the consequences of the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun city joining hands to make all the contradictions break out. If the 2 families really joined hands, it was not difficult to suppress the rebound of the Dongxing clan with absolute strength. Even if he killed Li Tianlan today and even fought his way out of the siege of 40,000 troops, the risk of the collapse of the Wang family of Beihai had been minimized with the support of the Special Warfare Group and the Southeast Group. If the 2 sides could really trust each other and join hands, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun city would definitely take out a lot of bargaining chips to calm the anger of the whole Zhongzhou state. The Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group would be badly hurt. Some of the core technologies of the Wang family of Beihai would even be forced to open up. Even the control of the Beihai Corps would be given up by Wang Tianzong. As the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou state, he was likely to face more than a few years in prison. All this might be exchanged for the complete destruction of the Dongxing clan and the complete disappearance of the Li family. Was it worth it or not? Wang Tianzong looked at Gu Xingyun, trying to find a tacit understanding with him. Dong Qingwudi was also looking at Gu Xingyun. His look was flat and indifferent. He could think of what Wang Tianzong thought of. However, Wang Tianzong faced a huge temptation. He imperceptibly lowered the risk that the Wang family of Beihai would completely collapse after the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun city joined hands. But no matter how low the risk was, it still existed. Dong Qingwudi had no way out. He was going to protect Li Tianlan today. If Wang Tianzong really dared to take action, no matter who he cooperated with, Dong Qingwudi would make him regret it for the rest of his life. Marshal Dongqing is too sensitive. Today is a normal maneuver. It's a competition between young trainees. Win or lose, life or death, and it's up to fate. I agree with you. No one outside the maneuver can interfere with the result of the maneuver. In an embarrassing silence, Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth, his face was livid, and he expressed his attitude word by word. No one spoke. But everyone who heard his statement was shocked inside. What he said couldn't be more obvious. Kunlun city had given up the plan against Li Tianlan. At least it gave up the plan against Li Tianlan in this maneuver. No matter what the result of the maneuver was, Li Tianlan would no longer face the pressure of Kunlun city. That's the best. Dong Qingwudi said indifferently. Wang Tianzong's eyes returned to calmness. Gu Xingyun kept taking deep breaths and clenching his fists. His body seemed to be trembling imperceptibly. Didn't he know that the Special Warfare Group and the Southeast Group had a great chance of winning? But he really couldn't afford such a big gamble. The strength of the Special Warfare Group was not weak. But Gu Xingyun was not as good as Wang Tianzong. A sword emperor of Zhongzhou state who was still at his peak might be able to break out of the encirclement after killing Li Tianlan. But once Li Tianlan died, a seriously injured god of war of Zhongzhou state would surely die without a whole body. Gu Xingyun had to give up the plan. He didn't want to let Li Tianlan go. But he didn't want to die either. Headmaster, what do you think? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and suddenly glanced at Zhuang Huai. I agree with His Highness Gu Xingyun. Zhuang Huayang smiled and said, the final maneuver is a normal competition. Anyone outside the maneuver who tries to interfere with the result of the maneuver is equivalent to destroying the future situation of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state. His attitude was clear. But it was just a clear attitude from the position of the headmaster of the Sky Academy. But everyone knew what Wang Tianzong was asking. Zhuang Huayang was one of the big shots of the academics. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou state was the current leader of the academics. Dong Chengwudi transferred troops into the Sky Academy without permission. President Li Huaqing was the most powerful figure who had the most reason to hold Dong Chengwudi accountable. Wang Tianzong looked at Zhuang Huayang. Zhuang Huayang smiled faintly and kept his composure. The attitude of the academics was subtle, but it was obvious that they didn't want to give up the relationship with Li Tianlan. They wanted to keep Li Tianlan, but they didn't want to take too much risk. Therefore, the academics only vaguely expressed a certain degree of support for the Dongqing clan. Of course, it was only a very subtle support. The president couldn't completely stand behind Dong Chengwudi to support him, at least not now. Because there was no clear result of all these conflicts. The president was now visiting abroad. When the maneuver of the two academies was over and everything was settled, he would come back to clean up the mess. At that time, if the Dongqing clan couldn't hold on, then the implicit support of the academics would naturally disappear, and the president would stand in the position of Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai to suppress the Dongqing clan. But if the Dongqing clan could continue to be strong, then the implicit support of the academics would become real support. President Li Huaqing personally expressed his position, and Dong Chengwudi's private transfer of troops would be reduced to a small matter. Of course, no matter how this matter was reduced to a small matter, the Dongqing clan would hand over the leadership of the entire border control corps. Repetition, capriciousness, cooperation, betrayal, deal, balance, compromise, all the words combined in the general trend. In fact, there was only one word. Politics. Wang Tianzong took a deep look at Zhuang Huayang and slowly sat in his seat. The Sword Emperor never lowered his head. So he didn't speak. His meaning was obvious. He wouldn't take action now, but he still didn't give up the plan to kill Li Tianlan. Dong Chengwudi narrowed his eyes. He moved his body, stepped on the railing, crossed the air, and landed directly in front of Li Tianlan. The 40,000 troops turned around at the same time, and their eyes fell on Dong Chengwudi. Dong Chengwudi looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Li Tianlan and Dong Chengwudi looked at each other. There was no emotion or joy in his eyes, but there was a kind of look that Dong Chengwudi wanted to see the most. It was an indescribable intimacy. Li Tianlan's heart was unprecedentedly agitated. He heard Dong Chengwudi's declaration that shocked the whole audience. He heard the 40,000 troops' hot-blooded and heroic oath to die at the same time. That was the Dongqing clan's most frank and truest attitude. It was the greatest kindness. That kind of kindness wrapped around him so tightly that he almost couldn't breathe. It was not until this moment that Li Tianlan realized that his so-called hesitation and uneasiness were actually illusory. When the Dongqing clan really stood in front of him at all costs to block all the wind and rain, he had no choice but to accept all this. All the protection and all the responsibilities. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't say anything. He could only bow deeply to Dong Chengwudi. Dong Chengwudi reached out to hold Li Tianlan. He pointed to the 40,000 troops behind him and said calmly, "You don't owe the Dongqing clan anything. But you owe them." Li Tianlan nodded, raised his hand to salute the 40,000 most dedicated and fanatical elite soldiers. The 40,000 people raised their hands to salute back at the same time. It was a silent and depressing picture, but also extremely restless and fanatical. It was silent, like a kind of inheritance. "I will give everything back to the Dongqing clan. No matter what you will lose today, Marshal." Li Tianlan put down his arm and looked at Dong Chengwudi's face, which looked a little young because of its cleanliness. "As long as I am alive, the Dongqing clan will never be dimmed in the future." His face was solemn. "This is my promise. This shouldn't be your promise." Dong Chengwudi's expression was complicated. He patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder and whispered, "It should be yours." He paused and didn't go on. He just chuckled and said, "Come on, maneuver. As long as you can win, the Li family will completely usher in a new life today. Everyone participating in today's maneuver is your enemy. Come on. No matter what situation you are in, outside the field, tens of thousands of people's eyes will be watching you." Li Tianlan nodded. Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun also appeared in front of Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. "Dad, don't worry." Wang Xingxiao looked calm and firm. I will do whatever it takes. Wang Tianzong nodded and said calmly, "Be careful. Destroy him." Gu Xingyun stood in front of Gu Hanshan and said in a hoarse and cold tone, "What's wrong with letting him live? Destroy him completely today. You must do it." "Don't worry," Gu Hanshan whispered, "we can do it." This was also their confidence to participate in the final maneuver. After all, Li Tianlan was alone, and what he would face was the joint efforts of several teams. What Li Tianlan didn't know was that after he showed his invincible realm combat power, within a few days, Gu Hanshan had broken through from the stabilization phase of the Thundershocking realm to the peak of the Thundershocking realm. And Xianxia, who had been suppressed in the Fire-Flaming realm for 3 years, also directly broke the realm. With the accumulation, he rushed to the stabilization phase of the Thundershocking realm in one fell swoop. When the 3 of them joined forces, they were definitely not weaker than Li Tianlan. Even if Li Tianlan had the invincible realm combat power, the 3 of them joined forces to win more than 60%. The 3 giants returned to the stands. Gu Xingyun waved his hand at Zhuang Huayong, signaling the start of the maneuver. Zhuang Huayong, who originally wanted to make an opening remark, suddenly didn't know what to say. He held the microphone, hesitated, and finally smiled, waved his hand, and said directly, "The maneuver begins." Maneuver content: strength is respected. Everyone entered the maneuver area at the same time. There were no rules and no time limit. Everyone hunted freely with their own means. The individual and the team that won in the end would be the first place of this team maneuver. A maneuver content without the slightest reason. All the trainees silently entered the dense forest on the edge of the maneuver area from different directions. Li Tianlan's heart was like a raging fire, but his face was as cold as ice. He entered the maneuver area. For a moment, almost all the cameras were capturing Li Tianlan, because he was the only villain in this maneuver. Li Tianlan's figure, standing quietly, appeared on the big screen. The maneuver area was very large. There were roads all around him, and there were no enemies. To the left? Or to the right? Under the gaze of all the people on the high platform, Li Tianlan reached out and casually broke a branch on the tree next to him. He held the branch in his hand. His posture was like holding a sword. The next moment, all the people on the high platform suddenly stirred. In the uproar, not only Gu Xingyun, but even Wang Tianzong suddenly stood up from his seat. Chapter 375. Li Tianlan didn't know how many people were watching this maneuver. Those who were at the scene couldn't be there because of other things, but they still paid attention to this place, as well as other forces outside Zhongzhou State. This could be said to be the most boring maneuver since the establishment of the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy. But it could also be said to be the most widely watched maneuver since the establishment of the 2 academies. In the past, the team maneuvers were all exciting from the beginning. Alliances, cooperation, betrayal, conflicts, battles, dozens of teams, all kinds of plots were constantly staged. The maneuvers were always changing at a fast pace. It was difficult to guess the real result until the last moment. But this maneuver was completely different from the past. This was the one with the largest number of teams abstaining from the maneuver, the one with the fewest participants, and the one with the simplest and clearest positions of the students. There was no multi-party game in this maneuver. There were only friends and enemies. Dozens of teams in the 2 academies, most of them abstained. Only 7 teams participated in this maneuver, with a total of 106 people. East Emperor Palace, Phantom Palace, 3000 World, Gile Peak, Blizzard, Elite, and Giant Whirlpool. The 6 teams had a total of 105 people. East Emperor Palace had only 1 person. Between friends and enemies. Such a contrast meant that this maneuver would either have the highest death rate in previous maneuvers or the lowest death rate in previous maneuvers. In the team maneuver, each person had 10 credits. Abstaining, serious injury, and death were all credits. If Li Tianlan alone defeated everyone, the accumulated credits plus the 2,000 credits of the first place in the maneuver would be more than 3,000 credits. These credits would be counted in East Emperor Palace, and eventually exceed the sum of all the credits of the other 3 forces of the young generation. At that time, the final maneuver would end early. In other words, the competition for the first place in the maneuver would end early. This was indeed a very boring thing. But boredom was also worth paying attention to. Everyone was concerned about the grievances between the Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City, and the Li family. They were concerned about the life and death of several young heavenly sons in Zhongzhou State. They were concerned about the turmoil after the giant group, the Southeast group, and the special warfare group completely fell out with each other. They were concerned about the potential of several young people who would become the peak combat power of Zhongzhou State 20 years later. This maneuver was boring, but it was exciting enough. Li Tianlan could almost feel the pairs of eyes falling on the big screen outside the maneuver area. Behind those gazes were enemies, friends, possible investments, and uncertain murderous intents. If he could defeat the 6 great teams today, he would have the qualifications to obtain a higher status than everyone else in the 6 great teams combined. The Li family was still there. Li Tianlan, who had shown enough strength and the strong support of the Dongqing clan, would bring real confidence to countless people. At the very least, he would no longer be the young man who only had potential but no support in the eyes of others. Behind him was the Dongqing clan. From the moment the 40,000 elites of the Border Control Corps rushed into the Sky Academy, Li Tianlan knew that the future of the Dongqing clan, like the future of the Li family, would become his responsibility. He couldn't escape, and he couldn't. He had to carry the Li family and even the entire Dongqing clan with his sword. He knew his sword would. But the others didn't know. Therefore, in this maneuver, Li Tianlan wanted the whole world to see his sword. The sword was a sword. There was nothing to hide. The dense forest in the maneuver area was extremely quiet. This area was very large, but there were very few participants. It was difficult for people who entered the maneuver area from different directions to gather at once. Students participating in the maneuver were allowed to bring cold weapons into the field, but they were not given any firearms, ammunition, or communication devices. All the weapons and communication devices were scattered in the maneuver area. The weapons were taken by themselves. Not long after Li Tianlan moved forward in the woods, he saw a sniper rifle and a few bullets casually thrown on the grass. Li Tianlan didn't even bother to look at it. He stepped on the sniper rifle and continued to move forward. The maneuver of the 2 academies was still carried out according to the previous ancient rules. But the students participating in today's maneuver were all real experts and elites. Few of them could use guns. And they were dealing with Li Tianlan. At Li Tianlan's level of strength, only a few special weapons and ordinary high-power sniper rifles could pose a certain threat unless the muzzle was pointed at Li Tianlan. Less than a dozen meters ahead, Li Tianlan found a military multi-channel communicator. The communicator was on. Li Tianlan adjusted several channels. After getting no news, he crushed it. He stood where he was and began to think about what he would do if he were Wang Shengshao and Gu Hanshan. The maneuver area was too large for people to gather for the time being. Although communication equipment could be found on the ground, it was difficult to contact each other through multiple channels. The most important thing to do was naturally to gather. Everyone had seen the environment of the maneuver area on the big screen. The woods, the pool, the warehouse, and the teaching building. The jungle environment was similar, so the gathering place couldn't be here. The pool was in the forest, neither too big nor too small. Even those who were familiar with the Sky Academy could not locate it accurately for a while. Only the teaching building and the warehouse, which were next to each other, were located in the center of the maneuver area, which was the easiest place to locate. The most likely gathering place of the 6 teams could only be the warehouse and the teaching building, which were almost next to each other. The other side had an absolute advantage. Gathering people together first, distributing communication equipment, and completing the grouping, spreading out to search with the warehouse and the teaching building as the center was the most reasonable arrangement. It could even be said that it was the only arrangement that could be done. Li Tianlan looked around and suddenly smiled. The jungle was very dense, and the surrounding environment was almost the same. Only the sun in the sky could distinguish the direction. Judging from the scale of the maneuver area, it would take at least 2 hours for the other side to gather everyone together again. At this time, Li Tianlan could almost walk through the entire maneuver area alone. Li Tianlan gently raised the corner of his mouth. He shook the branch in his hand to the sky. The gently swaying branch appeared on the screen in front of stand number 3, almost occupying the entire screen. The uproar on the stand had not dissipated. Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun stood expressionlessly, looking at the screen in front of them. Beside them, Dong Qingwudi suddenly laughed wildly after a brief surprise, baring his teeth and brandishing his claws. Everyone was looking at the screen. Everyone, including the 40,000 elite soldiers, looked as if they had seen a ghost. Everyone saw Li Tianlan's sword, even his invincible realm, and his road to the Chosen One. From this moment on, the name of the Chosen One seemed to have become really undisputed. The premise was that Li Tianlan could survive. Wang Tianzong slowly sat down, his face silent. He found that he had underestimated the young man after all. The big screen was divided into countless small screens. There were figures flashing on each small screen. Wang Xingxiao was rushing forward. Gu Hanshan was charging forward with all his strength. Li Tianlan was also moving forward quickly. Everyone was charging in the same direction. What was reflected on all the small screens was a tense and silent picture. But all of this lost its meaning in Wang Tianzong's eyes. In his eyes, this high-profile maneuver. From the moment Li Tianlan stepped into the maneuver area, from the moment he broke off the branch, the outcome was already doomed. I'm really stupid today. Really? I'll write less today. My mind is in a mess and I'm in a bad state. I've stayed up late for more than 2 months. I feel that I need to adjust my schedule. Chapter 376. The dilapidated warehouse and the abandoned teaching building were hidden in the middle of the dense forest. It was rarely visited, and it was eerily quiet. This was the first teaching building and warehouse of the Sky Academy when it was first established. Later, as the two academies recruited more and more people, the teaching building and dormitory area of the Sky Academy were constantly expanded, and the location was also changed. When Zhuang Huayang became the headmaster, this place was officially abandoned, and the whole area nearby was also isolated by the forest, becoming one of the candidate areas for the two academies' team to perform. It had just rained. The sun on the horizon shone through the shadow of the dense forest. The dense forest was very dense, so the sunlight in the forest looked like a belt of light all over the dense forest. The rain and dew in the forest had not dried up. The rain and dew on the grass and treetops slowly slid down and fell to the ground. The sound was soft and a little dull. There was no sound of insects in the forest, and it was silent. He carefully moved forward in the forest. All the vague sword intent covered his whole body, and only occasionally a faint blue arc of light flashed on his body. In front of him, the gap between the trees was getting wider and wider. He walked carefully, and the warehouse and the teaching building had already appeared in front of him. He took a deep breath gently. Instead of relaxing, his face became more cautious. He looked back at the road he had walked all the way. The forest was a little wet after the rain last night, but he left no footprints along the way. But some of the exposed grass was destroyed and fell to the ground. He frowned and flicked his fingers. There was a sound of ice freezing in the air. The ice that suddenly appeared was very thin, and it turned into some water droplets in an instant. The water droplets fell evenly on the grass behind him. The water vapor was dense, and there were raindrops on the grass. He watched quietly until he could not find any traces of his passing, and then he was relieved. The teaching building and the warehouse in front were still quiet. He lowered his body and moved faster, but his movements became more cautious. He began to charge forward. Ice and fire bloomed around him at the same time. The raindrops on the bushes and treetops dripped down as he moved forward and were immediately replenished by the dew formed by the ice cubes. Along the way, he did not leave any traces behind him at all. He moved forward 500 meters. The forest became sparser, and the warehouse and the teaching building became completely clear. The forest also came to the edge. The vigilance in his eyes did not fade at all, but became clearer. He did not know what was in the warehouse and the teaching building ahead. It might be one of his own, but it was also possible that they were enemies. He only had one enemy, but it was so powerful that he had nothing to say. In this extremely intense but simple maneuver, as the side with more people, the meaning of the warehouse and the teaching building was self-evident. This was the best and easiest rendezvous point. But their enemy, the enemy who was only 22 years old but already had invincible combat power. With his strength, he had no doubt that the enemy would not have the courage to rush here directly. He stopped and began to move horizontally at the edge of the forest, carefully observing every area and every tree. A scratch suddenly appeared on one of the thickest trees nearby. There were a few small spots below the scratches. His brows furrowed and his entire body relaxed. This was a team maneuver of more than 100 people against one person. Under the circumstance that no communication equipment was allowed, everyone entered the field in different positions. Before a complete communication network was established, their team advantage was actually not great. It could even be said that they were fighting on their own. Without any equipment that could communicate at any time, some simple markings became the most efficient method of communication. There were 4 types of signals. It was simple. A scratch represented a leader. A simple point represented an ordinary elite. A question mark meant that no target was found. An exclamation mark meant that the target had appeared in the marked position. Now, what appeared on the tree trunk was a scratch with 6 dots. Their appearance here completely showed that a leader and 6 elites had already assembled in the teaching building and warehouse area ahead. There were only 3 so-called leaders in this maneuver: Wang Shengxiao, Gu Hanshan, and Jiang Shangyu. The others were all ordinary elites that could be represented by 1 point. Now one of the 3 leaders had arrived at the rendezvous point ahead of the 6 elites, but there was no battle. This was almost the first step for them to integrate the advantages of the team. He chuckled softly. His entire body relaxed as he subconsciously took a step forward. What do these symbols represent? A voice suddenly sounded, soft and gentle. This voice was so abrupt and so close that it almost sounded in his ear. In a situation where he was not mentally prepared, this voice carried an incomparably strong sense of horror. An indescribable chill instantly rushed from his feet to his brain. His scalp was numb, and his whole body instinctively burst out the lightning and sword intent that had been accumulated in his body for a long time. Dense bolts of lightning with sharp sword intent appeared in an instant. His somewhat plump figure immediately turned a deep blue. However, before the deep blue had time to spread, a soft wind cut through the air. In his sight, a slender but weak branch waved over casually. It was a branch that was casually broken off from a tree. The branch was very thin, soft, and long, and there were even a few leaves on the front end. The dew on the leaves had disappeared, but the leaves were still wet and looked extremely green. The branch, which seemed to be unable to withstand any force, casually waved into the lightning. In silence, all the sword intent suddenly dissipated, and the lightning that had not had time to spread disappeared in a trance. The slender and weak branch fell on his shoulder. When the branch waved over, it was very weak. When it fell on his shoulder, it was also very weak. But in his feeling, the branch was as heavy as a mountain, and it suddenly and directly destroyed all his defenses. Bang! Under the great pressure, his body uncontrollably knelt down on one knee. Crack! His thick and powerful arm suddenly snapped, and the bones in his shoulder were even more so shattered. The branch was still quietly placed on his shoulder. Because it touched something, the flexible branch bent. The wind blew over, and the green leaves on the branch swayed gently. He looked at the branch with a dull face and even forgot the pain. He had no idea where the force that completely crushed him and directly destroyed his arm came from. The lightning completely dissipated. The sharp pain finally began to spread from his shoulder. His eyes darkened and his face was pale. In his somewhat blurred vision, a figure was standing quietly in front of him, putting the branch on his shoulder, looking at the scratches and 6 small spots on the trunk in front of him. Black trousers, casual leather shoes, short hair, and a white shirt. He stood quietly, not arrogant, not strong, not fierce, but with a kind of indescribable evil, like a demon. He didn't get an answer, so he casually answered, took back the branch, and asked again, "What do these symbols represent?" Li Tianlan, he tightly covered his broken arm and laughed bitterly. Looking at the enemy who appeared beside him out of nowhere, he only felt that everything around him seemed too unrealistic. Li Tianlan glanced at him and seemed to feel that the fat man in front of him was a little familiar. He raised his eyebrows and said, "What's your name?" The fat man didn't say anything. Under the huge gap in strength, he didn't even feel humiliated, only astonishment and disbelief. In a trance, he still remembered the entrance maneuver in the spring 3 years ago. When he first saw Li Tianlan in the entrance maneuver, although he was kind, he still looked down on him. It had only been 3 years, but the other party even forgot his name. A master of the thunder-shocking realm. He suddenly felt that in the eyes of the other party, he was a nonentity of the thunder-shocking realm. "I'm Fan Haoyu," the fat man said in a low voice. "We've met before, the entrance maneuver, and the final battle of Heaven Capital." Fan Haoyu, a senior student of the Sky Academy. In this team collaborative combat maneuver, he was the elite leader of one of the 7 teams. "Oh," Li Tianlan said, thought for a moment, and said, "You're Yuetong's friend." He shook the branch in his hand, thought again, and added, "You're the son of Minister Fan Tianyin?" Fan Tianyin, one of the core figures of the Southeast faction, the minister of the Ministry of Security of Zhongzhou State. "Yes." Fan Haoyu looked at Li Tianlan calmly. He used to be familiar with Li Tianlan. He was still familiar with him now. But the natural position was there. No matter how familiar they were still enemies. "Your father saved your life." Li Tianlan said, "I won't kill you. But Minister Fan owes me a favor. After the maneuver, I'll get it at the right time." His tone was flat without any ups and downs. The corner of Fan Haoyu's mouth moved, but he didn't know what to say. Li Tianlan's tone was too flat, as if he said that Fan Tianyin owed him a favor, and then he really owed him a favor. He didn't say what would happen if the Fan family didn't admit it. He went to ask for a favor. If he couldn't get it, he could pay with his life. Fan Haoyu experienced Li Tianlan's style for the first time. He was not arrogant and domineering, nor was he hysterical. He was calm and indifferent, but he had an irresistible strength. "You people are good at hiding. I came all the way here, and you're the 5th person I met. It's a little less." Li Tianlan raised the branch in his hand and scratched the thick trunk with the mark. The branch bent without any force. But the thick tree shook violently, and then suddenly cracked. The trunk tilted to both sides, and the almost completely invisible sword intent swept through the whole tree. The lush canopy. The straight tree trunk instantly turned into countless splinters. Before the debris fell to the ground, it had completely disappeared in the air. Fan Haoyu only felt a tingling in his scalp and asked subconsciously, "Where are the other 4 people?" Li Tianlan walked past him and said lightly, "They're not very lucky. None of them has a father like your father." Fan Haoyu sat on the ground in a daze. The moment the branch in Li Tianlan's hand broke his countless thunder sword intent, all his toughness and pride seemed to have completely disappeared. Looking at Li Tianlan's back walking into the teaching building, he didn't feel the so-called humiliation, but the most helpless powerlessness. Li Tianlan continued to move forward. When he was about to walk out of the woods, he saw a marked tree again. It was also a scratch. However, there were slightly more dots at the bottom. Li Tianlan didn't know what these marks represented. But now he was sure that these marks represented the way other teams contacted each other. This also meant that the teaching building and the warehouse in front were no longer in a state of no one, and even had traps. For Li Tianlan, it was enough to know this. Li Tianlan walked out of the edge of the woods in silence. There was an open space outside the edge of the woods. The warehouse and the teaching building stood there quietly, in silence. The morning sun shone unscrupulously on the open space, bright and warm. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, glanced at the warehouse and the teaching building, and went straight forward. The branch was still in his hand. He raised his hand and casually pulled off a green leaf from the branch. Wang Xingxiao could clearly see Li Tianlan's movements. There was no distance in the world of binoculars. Looking down, Wang Xingxiao could even see every expression on Li Tianlan's face and count every leaf on the branch in his hand. But there was no joy or excitement on his face. "He's coming." Wang Xingxiao held the binoculars and said in a flat tone. "So fast." Jiang Shangyu, who arrived almost at the same time as Wang Xingxiao, was meditating. Hearing Wang Xingxiao's words, he opened his eyes in astonishment. "Mount Han hasn't arrived yet." Wang Xingxiao put down the binoculars in silence and said nothing. He knew that Li Tianlan would definitely choose to come here, but he didn't expect it to be so fast. If Li Tianlan had come 10 minutes later, they would have been more prepared. "I can hold him for a while." Behind Wang Xingxiao, a burly young man stood up and said calmly, "Mo Xue." Wang Xingxiao frowned and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "There's no other way." The young man said calmly, "I'll take my people to hold him. When all our people are here, the rest is up to you. Your role is not to be the vanguard." Wang Xingxiao said. "Neither are you and Jiang Shangyu," Chen Moxue said blandly. He was burly and strong, but his name was a little feminine. But in this session of the two academies, no one dared to look down on him. He was a young genius who was only slightly lower than Song Ci and Jiang Shangyu in the hearts of the higher-ups. He was the leader of the Deep Sea Academy and the Blizzard. At the same time, he was also a young genius who approached Wang Xingxiao without hesitation after Wang Xingxiao joined the Shadow Organization. Even though he knew that Li Tianlan had the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, he did not flinch at all. In this maneuver, his role was equally crucial. Except for them, no one knew what they had prepared in this maneuver to deal with Li Tianlan. The three young chosen ones were indeed a luxurious lineup. If they cooperated well and stood on top of each other, they would not be weaker than Li Tianlan. But not weaker than Li Tianlan was not their goal. What they wanted was to win. So in this maneuver, in addition to the three young chosen ones, Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai also prepared two sets of sword formations. The sword formation of Kunlun City was famous in the Dark World. But this time, one of the two sets of sword formations belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. Chen Moxue's role. He was the core figure in the sword formation of the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai had the Heaven Punishment Troop, which represented the most elite and terrifying conventional force of the Wang family of Beihai. In this maneuver, the sword formation of the Wang family of Beihai came from the Heaven Punishment Troop. This was also one of the trump cards of this maneuver. The Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. One sword punishment. Chapter 377. The land from the woods to the warehouse was flat and empty. There was only breeze and sunshine in the morning of Huding. The sun fell on this empty flat land. Light and shadows coexisted, and it was eerily quiet. Li Tianlan stood at the edge of the woods and stared calmly at every corner nearby. This maneuver was simple to the point of boredom but destined to be bloody. Because there were only enemies, it was impossible to waste too much time. Unless Li Tianlan wanted to hide in the dark and attack them one by one. Li Tianlan didn't want to waste time. He didn't want to waste time. And Wang Xingxiao, who had an absolute advantage in strength and number, obviously didn't want to waste time. This was the best place for the maneuver. Li Tianlan silently adjusted his breath. He held the soft branch in his hand. The branch was very long, and its tip hung on the ground. He took a step forward. The branch with its tip hanging on the ground rubbed against the ground. In an instant, there seemed to be the sound of thousands of long swords being unsheathed echoing between heaven and earth. The branch rubbed against the ground with the sound of metal rubbing. For a moment, in different corners of the warehouse, the teaching building, the flat land, the woods, there seemed to be different people drawing their swords. They drew their swords, but there was no sword energy. Only a sword intent that was so indiscernible that it could not be felt swept across the entire space. On the teaching building, Wang Xingxiao, who was holding a telescope, suddenly stiffened on the spot. The sword intent swept past him. In the blink of an eye, Wang Xingxiao's breath began to fall rapidly from the peak to the bottom, and then disappeared completely. His breathing was slowing down, and even his heartbeat became indistinct. Jiang Shangyu stood near Wang Xingxiao and also suppressed all his aura. The branch was still rubbing against the ground. The sword intent that filled every corner of heaven and earth kept spreading, gathering, and spreading. The completely uncatchable sword intent kept flowing between illusion and reality. Li Tianlan moved faster and faster. Crack! In front of Wang Shengxiao, the famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai, firmament, which weighed hundreds of kilograms, shook. Wang Xingxiao's eyes focused, and he held the sword hilt tightly. The heavy sword suddenly became stable in the invisible sword intent all over the sky. The illusory but real sword intent spread through every floor of the teaching building. It seemed to find nothing and finally left the teaching building slowly. Wang Xingxiao's breath began to rise again. He held the sword hilt in his hand and looked at Jiang Shangyu. Both of their eyes were solemn. Invincible realm experts were never afraid of ambushes. Within the range of their domain, nothing could hide. The same was true for invincible realm experts who did not cultivate the domain and took another path. Wherever their sword wills passed, they could also see through any disguise. Li Tianlan had the combat capability of the invincible realm. In terms of the quality of sword intent, he was already in the invincible realm, so he naturally had some invincible realm means. However, his realm was still a little low, so his sword intent couldn't find Wang Xingxiao and Jiang Shangyu, who had hidden their breaths. But how could the others hide? Li Tianlan kept moving forward. He had already reached the flat ground between the forest and the warehouse. The sound of soft branches rubbing against the ground grew louder and louder. Wang Xingxiao's face darkened. He hesitated, picked up the walkie-talkie, and was about to say something. Li Tianlan suddenly lifted the branch that was rubbing against the ground. In an instant, the illusory sound of countless swords being unsheathed suddenly disappeared. However, the sound of a sword being unsheathed could be heard from every corner of the warehouse. Swords flew out uncontrollably from the surrounding dark corners. Behind each sword was an elite that was lying in ambush in the corner. Snap! Li Tianlan flicked the leaf he had picked from the branch into the sky. The leaf was swaying in the air. At this moment, Wang Xingxiao, who instinctively felt that something was wrong, subconsciously raised his binoculars and looked at the leaf that was flicked by Li Tianlan. The leaf was very small, green, and soft. There was no killing intent or sword intent floating in the air. Wang Xingxiao suddenly realized that he seemed to be retarded for a moment. He suddenly lowered the binoculars and tried to lock on Li Tianlan. But Li Tianlan had already disappeared. His speed of advance had not been fast, but the moment when countless swords flew into the sky, his body directly tightened. He strode wildly. Unimaginable power seeped into the ground from his feet. The whole warehouse and the teaching building seemed to be roaring and trembling. Li Tianlan moved like lightning and rushed directly to the corner closest to him. Everything happened in a flash. A hand reached out from the corner. He seemed to realize that his sword had flown into the sky and wanted to reach out to grab it. But the hand he grabbed was the other hand. Their hands were clasped together as if they were shaking hands, but the huge force unhesitatingly broke his arm, pulling up the elite member of the Blizzard team who had been hiding in the dark. Li Tianlan's expression was calm and indifferent. There was no fanaticism, no ferociousness, and no killing intent. He was just calm, indifferent, and superior. He clenched his fist. He waved his fist. Under the severe pain, all the fierceness of the elite of the Blizzard broke out completely. His long sword, which was brought into the sky by Li Tianlan's sword intent, had fallen. The elite of the Blizzard suddenly roared, his whole body tightened, and the scorching temperature spread all over his body. The moment he fell into Li Tianlan's hands, he did not show the slightest timidity. He seemed to want to fully break out his strength of the fire-flaming realm and fight desperately. The temperature was rising. His body glowed with light. But it was not fire. It was extremely red and mournful blood light. Li Tianlan punched him directly in the heart. Amidst the muffled sounds, every muscle on his enormous body seemed to burst into a bloody mist. The blood mist rose. Li Tianlan loosened his hand and kicked him away casually. This kick seemed to be very light because it was too casual. But the elite of the blizzard who was kicked away seemed to have a bomb hidden in his body. All the power burst out in his body. His body flew up in the air, and before it landed, it was directly shattered into pieces of flesh and blood. Everyone saw this scene through the big screen. The entire grandstand was in an uproar. Those who could come to watch the maneuver were not ordinary people. At least the death of a person would not make a fuss. But the elite students in the maneuver of the two academies were kicked into a pile of flesh and blood. Such a cruel method still shocked everyone. Everyone seemed to feel Li Tianlan's suppressed anger and resentment. But on the screen, his eyes were still calm. The rain of blood fell behind him. Li Tianlan took a step and changed his direction. Like a phantom under the sun, he silently rushed across the distance of tens of meters and appeared in another corner. In another corner, an elite of the shadow organization had gotten up and was ready to move, but there was a shadow above his head. He looked up in astonishment. From bottom to top, he did not see Li Tianlan's calm and indifferent face. In his sight, there was only a foot that was getting bigger and bigger. The lines on the sole of the leather shoes were constantly magnified in his eyes. Bang! Li Tianlan stepped his head into his chest with one foot. Blood spurted out from his body like a fountain, streaked across the sky, and left a string of blood sparkling with dreamy colors in the sun. The long sword that was guided to the sky by his sword intent finally began to fall. Li Tianlan moved. The open space in front of the warehouse moved, and the atmosphere suddenly changed. The scorching sun did not seem to rise, but the surrounding environment directly became extremely hot. A deep and steady voice abruptly resounded in every corner of the vicinity. Shadow, blizzard. Formation. Li Tianlan paused for a while and slowly raised his head. The still bright but dazzling light shone down from the sky. Invisible heat waves continued to rise, and the sky became blurred. The heat twisted the air, and everything in sight became vague. On the flat ground, countless fallen leaves were set on fire in the blazing sword intent and rushed to the sky. The fire began to occupy all consciousness. Amidst the countless fluttering flames, a verdant green leaf was leisurely descending. It fell in the twisted air. It fell in the burning leaves. It was still falling. It kept falling. In the maneuver area where the heat waves were rising, the air was slightly twisted. A burly and handsome figure appeared above the warehouse. He stood in the air, holding the broad-bladed long sword in his hand tightly, and his breath was wild. The moment his figure appeared, the whole sky seemed to be on fire. The dazzling blue lightning lit up on his sword edge and danced wantonly. The fire and lightning intertwined wildly, rising in every corner and occupying all the space. There was fire everywhere. There was thunder everywhere. The sword intent whistled. Above the light, there was only a cold and arrogant voice resounding on the flat ground in front of the warehouse and on the number 3 stand through the big screen. Chen Moshue, leader of Blizzard, send your highness to hell. Boom. Fire and lightning interweaved, occupying everyone's field of vision as they fell from the sky in a frenzy. Li Tianlan could not see Chen Moshue, who was going to send him to hell. Chen Moshue could not see Li Tianlan either. But the sword intent of the fire and lightning had already enveloped everything. So what if he could not see it? He raised his long sword high, and his voice shook the sky. Kill. Crack! Wang Tianzong sat in his seat without any expression. His eyes were still calm, but his palms were exerting force quietly, and he unconsciously crushed the armrest of his seat. Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. It's Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. On the stand, next to Zhuang Huayang, the principal of the Sky Academy, a very senior old general cried out involuntarily. Heaven Punishment Sword Formation, one sword to kill the sky. No one thought that there was anything exaggerated about this statement. The Heaven Punishment Troop could be said to be the most elite conventional troop of the Wang family of Beihai. When the whole troop gathered, its deterrent power was even far greater than that of ordinary invincible realm experts. The number of people in the Heaven Punishment Troop was always controlled at 300. Every time one person died, another person would be added. There were always 300 people, no more and no less. But these were 300 people with the lowest strength at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. The Heaven Punishment Troop consisted of 5 people in a squad, 15 people in a squadron, and 150 people in a battalion. There were 20 squadrons in total. The Heaven Punishment Sword Formation was a sword formation on the scale of a squadron. Each squadron could form an independent Heaven Punishment Sword Formation, but independent sword formations could be connected with each other through special sword intent. When the whole Heaven Punishment Troop gathered together, 15 people in a formation, 20 sword formations were connected with each other, and the sword intent of 300 experts with the lowest strength at the peak of the fire-flaming realm gathered into one sword. Why couldn't that sword strike kill the sky? This is indeed the starting move of the Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. The old general stared at the screen intertwined with fire and lightning and laughed at himself. The Wang family of Beihai really put in a lot of effort. Although the number of people in this group is small, their average strength is very good, almost as good as the formation of the real Heaven Punishment Troop. Is it useful? Zhuang Huayang sat quietly and looked calm. Those involved can't see clearly. It's a pity. The old general was stunned. He subconsciously glanced at Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun not far away. The 2 most powerful men in Zhongzhou State looked tense and expressionless. On a small screen that was temporarily separated from the big screen, Gu Hanshan was rushing to the warehouse at full speed with dozens of elites. Indeed, the old general nodded. It's a pity. Fire and lightning intertwined like a waterfall. The messy sword intent kept gathering in the waterfall-like light curtain, getting stronger and stronger. The light filled every corner. In the shadow. In the corner. One by one, the elites who ambushed around the warehouse in advance slowly appeared. Led by Chen Moshue, 15 elites with the lowest strength at the fire-flaming realm quietly surrounded Li Tianlan in the center. Your Highness, please go to hell. In the waterfall-like light curtain, Chen Moshue's voice shook the lightning and raging fire. Countless sword intent condensed into a sword. The sword light and the light curtain intertwined. With his voice, the violent light curtain tore the sky in an instant and roared down like a furious dragon. Your Highness, please go to hell. Your Highness, please go to hell? There was a ripple in Li Tianlan's eyes. The ripple gradually expanded and finally turned into a touch of arrogance. The arrogance turned into a wild laugh. The wild laughter penetrated the light curtain and sword intent, with an indescribable frivolity and violence. Send me to hell? Who deserves it? Li Tianlan laughed wildly and reached out his hand. He put his fingers together like a sword. Under the mighty light curtain, an extremely bright and dazzling light suddenly appeared. Who deserves it? Boom! The wild thunder was mighty, and the lightning, which had almost faded from blue to pure white, was constantly blooming in Li Tianlan's hands. 24 moves of sword. The first blade, Wuji. The moment the Wuji sword intent appeared, the sword intent changed instantly. The first blade turned into the 5th blade. The 5th blade, flying snow. It never snowed under the July sun in Huading. But a bone-chilling killing intent and brutality suddenly spread out with Li Tianlan as the center. The 5th blade turned again. The 16th blade, wild thunder. Amidst the bone-chilling coldness, the sound of thunder reverberated throughout the world. Li Tianlan's palms suddenly closed. He clenched his fists. A punch hit the sky. Boom! The 1st blade, the 5th blade, and the 16th blade. The sword intent of the 3 swords were connected. The completely blazing white lightning was released wildly with Li Tianlan as the center in an instant. The blazing white lightning tore the light curtain with sharp sword intent. A wave of air swept across the flat ground in front of the warehouse. The wave of air swept across the edge of the forest with the vast lightning. With a loud bang, countless trees turned into powder in an instant. The chaotic light was dissipating. The moment the light curtain of the heaven-punishing sword formation was broken, Chen Moshue's calm voice sounded, with a touch of determination and tragedy. Heaven punishment. After the light curtain collapsed, it was the sword. More than a dozen sword intents gathered into a giant sword phantom hundreds of meters long. Chen Moshue of the Blizzard team, with a sword, merged with the giant sword phantom in an instant. He and the sword became one. Between heaven and earth, there seemed to be a brilliant flowing light flashing under the bright sun. The flowing light was silent, but with overwhelming killing intent, it rushed directly to Li Tianlan. The flowing light was tall and broad. Its tail was still in the sky, but its front had already reached Li Tianlan. Chen Moshue's figure merged into the flowing light, and the sword intent was bursting. Li Tianlan, whose eyes were completely wild, still reached out his hand. He opened his 5 fingers. The sword intent flowed in his 5-finger sword, subtle but extremely fierce and violent. The 21st blade shatter of land. The subtle sword intent instantly rushed up to the sky. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his hand. In an instant, the flowing light and the sword intent rushing up to the sky shattered and exploded. Endless light swept across the sky and the earth. In the chaotic light and shadow, Li Tianlan's palm kept moving up. The sword intent of the flowing light pierced his arm, and his palm was covered with blood. Blood gushed from the corner of his mouth and dripped on his white shirt, like a blooming plum blossom. The shatter of land and river and the heaven punishment. Chen Moshue's figure held the sword in the air and stabbed straight down. Li Tianlan's palm rose. At the moment when his sword intent broke out, Li Tianlan grabbed his neck fiercely. "Do you deserve it?" Li Tianlan grabbed Chen Moshue's neck and asked in a cold tone. Chen Moshue looked at Li Tianlan, who was bleeding from the corner of his mouth, in disbelief. At this moment he was not thinking about why he failed. He suddenly thought of a very ridiculous question. Li Tianlan broke the heaven-punishing sword formation with his bare hands at the cost of injury. But before that he clearly saw the branch in Li Tianlan's hand. If that was his weapon, where did the branch go? Chapter 378. Chen Moshue had thought of many possibilities. Li Tianlan was very strong. He had the combat capability of the invincible realm at the age of 22. In this maneuver, no one was his opponent in a one-on-one fight. Chen Moshue knew very well that even if he had the heaven punishment sword formation, it would be difficult to send Li Tianlan to hell. After all, his strength was a little weak. The strength of the members of the sword formation was also a little weak. The real heaven punishment sword formation was centered by a real expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, assisted by 2 experts of the thunder-shocking realm and other experts of the fire-flaming realm. After the sword intent was condensed, the heaven punishment sword formation was almost no less than the full blow of the top expert of the half-step invincible realm. Now the strength of the heaven punishment sword formation formed by Chen Moshue was uneven. He himself was also a long way from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. In such a sword formation, the sword move he exerted was at most infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm. Naturally, such a sword move could not kill Li Tianlan. But according to Chen Moshue's expectation, this sword move could at least seriously injure Li Tianlan. After all, according to the information they received, Li Tianlan had fought Gu Qianchuan and Gu Xingyun a few days ago. He was injured and was not in his peak state at all. Even if Li Tianlan broke their sword formation, he was bound to pay the price. Chen Moshue had thought of too many scenes after Li Tianlan was injured. At the moment, Li Tianlan was indeed injured. Blood flowed down the corner of Li Tianlan's mouth. The sword energy of the heaven punishment sword seemed to tear the skin on his arm. The red blood spread along the cuff and dyed Li Tianlan's entire palm red. Li Tianlan's essence, qi, and spirit did not decline at all. Instead, he became crazier and colder. He exerted a little force in his palm, grabbed Chen Moshue's neck, and lifted him up directly. Chen Moshue's face gradually turned purple, and he had difficulty breathing. He struggled subconsciously. In his sight, Li Tianlan's eyes were bloodshot, and the blood densely occupied the whites of his eyes. His eyes were scarlet. It was an indescribable violence and demonic. Wild, cold, fierce, irritable, without the so-called reason and thinking. At this moment, Li Tianlan was full of an indescribable strangeness and demonic nature. Chen Moxue spat out a mouthful of blood. He wanted to laugh, but he was extremely aggrieved. What had the heaven-punishing sword formation, which was regarded as one of the trump cards of the drill, done? It just left some superficial injuries on Li Tianlan. Oh, maybe he even broke a branch? This was the result of the battle? What made Chen Moxue most aggrieved was that the so-called heaven punishment sword formation was just a starting move. The sword formation had just been formed when it was broken. No words could describe the absurdity in Chen Moxue's heart. When the shadow of the giant sword pressed down on Li Tianlan like a flowing light, the sword intent of the shattering land was released in his hand. It was so subtle, yet so fierce and fast. The blood-stained palm tore apart the sword intent of the giant sword in an instant. When the heaven punishment sword was about to reach its peak, the palm directly grabbed his neck and pulled him down. Heaven punishing sword. The light curtain at the beginning was not, nor was the shadow of the giant sword. The real sky punishment sword was Chen Moxue's own sword as the core of the sword formation. The sword was interrupted by Li Tianlan at the most subtle moment when it was close to the peak. The slightest error could lead to a huge error. It was so exaggerated that it was like a coincidence. What was more exaggerated was that Chen Moxue did not feel Li Tianlan's sword intent or his power during the whole process. It seemed that the other party just stretched out his hand, and then everything was over. How did you? Li Tianlan's palm was getting tighter and tighter. Chen Moxue held Li Tianlan's palm tightly, and his voice was hoarse and distorted. Li Tianlan glanced at him. His eyes were cold and indifferent. Li Tianlan lifted Chen Moxue's hand and suddenly smashed Chen Moxue's body into the ground. Plop. It was not the dull sound of the body falling to the ground. Li Tianlan took the opportunity to smash Chen Moxue's body as if it had been smashed directly into the water. A faint blue light appeared on the ground silently. The light continued to refract, spread, and converged with each other. That was the most violent lightning. But at this moment, the lightning was like water gathering, hard and soft. Countless rays of light intertwined into the water surface, which dissolved most of the power that Li Tianlan had exerted on Chen Moxue. Blood kept gushing from the corners of Chen Moxue's mouth. The heaven punishment sword was interrupted by Li Tianlan at the most subtle moment. The sword intent did not pour out, but directly exploded in his body. Li Tianlan's power, which had been dissolved by more than half, rushed into his body and directly destroyed the balance in his body. Chen Moxue's face was pale, and his aura declined in an instant. The heaven punishment sword did not seriously injure Li Tianlan. Instead, it directly made Chen Moxue lose his combat capability. The water waves gathered by the lightning were still surging, wrapping Chen Moxue and spreading up along his legs. Li Tianlan loosened his hand and turned around abruptly. At the end of the water and lightning, Wang Xingxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, slowly walked over. The heavenly son of Beihai, who had always been modest and gentle, had no smile on his face at this time. His face was expressionless, and his eyes were cold. He held the broad and heavy sword tightly in his hand, and his whole body was surging with sword energy. Li Tianlan's scarlet eyes immediately locked on the vital parts of Wang Xingxiao's body. Let him go. Wang Xingxiao gently raised the giant sword in his hand, looked at Li Tianlan, and said in a calm tone. Boundless sword intent whizzed around him and gathered toward the ether sword in his hand. He looked straight into Li Tianlan's eyes, with an irresistible toughness and majesty. Li Tianlan's scarlet eyes grew crazier. He put his palm on the top of Chen Moxue's head. The water-like lightning continued to spread along Chen Moxue's body. Li Tianlan's palm also lit up with a touch of blue, and then it turned into blazing white. The blue water waves and the blazing white sword intent, one above the other, were in a stalemate with Chen Moxue's body as the battlefield. Chen Moxue's face suddenly twisted, as if he was suffering great pain. Let him go. Wang Xingxiao's eyes grew colder, and the surging sword intent around him had a touch of killing intent and mania. He had to keep Chen Moxue alive. Chen Moxue was different from ordinary elites. In fact, Although his talent was not as good as that of the real young chosen one, it was not much worse. In the vast Deep Sea Academy, except for Jiang Shangyu's 3,000 World and Song Sea's Phantom, the Blizzard was the most powerful organization. Chen Moshue took the initiative to approach him, and the Wang family of Beihai had no reason to let go of such a talent. This was the era of the Chosen One. But under the brilliance of the Chosen One, other people might shine. In the era of Wang Tianzong, Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun, there would also be figures like Dongqing Wudi, Sidu Tangyue, Gu Qianchuan, and the Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu. With Chen Mashue's talent, 10 years later he could definitely grow into a top superior of the half-step invincible realm. Such a person would definitely be the most important in the team Wang Xingxiao would set up in the future. You. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Xingxiao and sneered. His voice was a little weird, a little stiff and hollow, but it sounded from all directions, grand and indifferent. Wang Xingxiao glanced at Chen Moshue. The two looked at each other for a moment. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his palm. The blazing white lightning gathered in his palm. 21st Blade, Shatter of Land. Kill! The moment the sword intent broke out in Li Tianlan's palm, Wang Xingxiao suddenly raised the giant sword in his hand. Chen Mashue's face was completely distorted, and he suddenly roared. The lightning and water waves that wrapped his body faded. Chen Mashue's whole body was spurting blood. The blood shone with a mournful red luster, with wisps of sword intent. That was the sky-punishing sword intent that exploded in Chen Mashue's body. In an instant, the sword intent in the blood and the water-like lightning blended with each other. In every corner, the elites of Blizzard and Phantom drew their swords at the same time. Wang Xingxiao's figure appeared in the sky, and the dark giant sword pointed at Li Tianlan with a cold light. In an instant, it seemed that all the sword intent madly gathered toward Wang Xingxiao's body. Sky punishing! Wang Xingxiao's loud and majestic voice rang out like thunder. The surging sword intent rose from the bottom to the top, and the whole world turned into a dazzling blue in the blink of an eye. The roaring thunder rolled down from the sky. The sun retreated under the blue sword intent, and it rained heavily in the sky. The blue sword rain. Li Tianlan broke Chen Mashue's sky-punishing sword formation. But Chen Mashue was still there, and so was the incomplete sword formation. Wang Xingxiao's appearance directly replaced Chen Mashue as the new core of the sky-punishing sword formation, and Chen Mashue, who was seriously injured, became a support with the remaining sky-punishing sword intent. This sword strike was abrupt and violent. The sword rain fell and gathered. Wang Xingxiao's figure was getting higher and higher, and this sword was out of everyone's sight. His figure disappeared in an instant. The torrential rain directly gathered together with the messy sword intent. The sword rain merged, and everyone's sword intent completely gathered together, turning into a beam of blue light that was so bright that it could run through the sky and the earth. One end of the beam was the sky, and the other end was Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan suddenly put his hands together. The sword intent of the shattering of land kept blooming between his hands, and the blazing white light intertwined in front of him, turning into a light curtain. The torrential rain turned into a beam of light, and the beam of light shone straight down and fell on the light curtain. The whole light curtain suddenly shook, and a lot of blood spilled behind the light curtain. Li Tianlan's blood. Boom! Countless sword intents surged together and exploded directly. The blazing white light curtain was shattered in an instant, and the beam of light formed by the sword rain completely disappeared. In the messy light and shadow, Li Tianlan's clothes were completely torn, and his whole body was covered with blood. His face was pale, and a wound on his forehead kept spurting blood. The blood covered his face, making him look extremely ferocious. Li Tianlan's eyes were scarlet, and he suddenly roared. He suddenly tore off his torn shirt and roared with all his strength. Blood flowed down from his body. At this moment, Li Tianlan was like a wounded beast, with no sense left, only madness. The sword intent of the shattering of land flowed in his hands and changed instantly. The 14th blade, slaughter. The crazy killing intent spread all over the sky with the awe-inspiring flashing sword light. The shattering of land was the sword of shattering. The 14th blade was the heart of slaughter. The two sword intents merged with each other and superimposed to form a new sword. The 17th blade, Ayajura. All the blood dripping down from Li Tianlan's body floated in the air at the same time. The blood gathered into a scarlet sword in front of him. Li Tianlan, who was like a bloody man, suddenly reached out and held the blood sword in his hand. In an instant, the endless blood-colored sword light suddenly burst out. The sword light rose above the ground, like a bloody tide surging with killing intent. Wang Xianxiao's figure appeared in the sky. He held the hilt of firmament tightly with both hands and fell straight down from the top. His figure was so far away, so clear. There was no sword light, no faint blue. There was only one person and one sword. Falling. Sprinting. His speed was getting faster and faster. The dark firmament rubbed against the air, igniting flames, and then the flames were extinguished under the high speed. A sword intent so grand that it almost didn't exist directly covered with Wang Xianxiao's figure. A faint blue dot burned on the blade of firmament. Twinkle, twinkle, twinkle. The flickering blue dot was very small, but it was as grand as the whole sky. It wasn't that there was no sword intent between heaven and earth. All the sword intent turned into heaven and earth with this heaven punishment sword. The bloody tide rose against the sky. Li Tianlan was as ferocious as a devil and as crazy as a Jura. The heaven punishment sword intent that covered heaven and earth fell directly into the bloody tide. Wang Xianxiao's figure was surrounded by the blood-colored sword light, but for the first time, it was so clear and so majestic. The faint blue dot on firmament became brighter and brighter in the bloody sword light. The half-style samsara he wanted to cultivate failed, and he was seriously injured. Under such circumstances, with the help of the heaven punishment sword formation, this could almost be said to be Wang Xianxiao's strongest sword. The sword intent continued to stack and condense, and this sword steadily entered the half-step invincible realm. It was not an ordinary half-step invincible realm. This was equivalent to Wang Xianxiao's full strength after he entered the half-step invincible realm. It was like heaven and earth were squeezing at the same time. The blood-colored sword light stagnated. The faint blue dot on the blade of firmament expanded instantly. This sword was like heaven and earth, like eternity. The huge blade collided with the bloody sword condensed by blood. The picture seemed to freeze for a moment. The faint blue was no longer flashing. The bloody light was no longer restless. Without a sound, all the sword intent and sword chi shattered one after another. A fierce storm suddenly rose on the flat ground in front of the warehouse. The storm surged and exploded in absolute silence, and the aftermath swept through every corner of the battlefield. Chen Moshue, who was seriously injured and was about to leave the battlefield, and more than a dozen elites of Shadow and the Blizzard were all swallowed by the storm in an instant. The chaotic bloody light rose in the storm, and the broken limbs and corpses were completely broken in the storm. The storm continued to sweep across the flat ground and rushed into the dense forest. Countless trees were uprooted and broken in the air under the storm. The sword intent was still raging. Boom! After the silent destruction, there was finally a deafening bang. Wang Xianxiao and Li Tianlan spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time. With Li Tianlan as the center, the hard and flat ground suddenly collapsed and became a deep pit. Water stains appeared in the deep pit. The water stains turned into streams and quickly filled the whole pit. The flat ground turned into a pool of water. Li Tianlan's figure was directly blasted out nearly 200 meters in the broken sword intent. He smashed through the thick wall of the warehouse and disappeared from everyone's sight. Wang Xianxiao's figure rushed into the dense forest uncontrollably. A pair of palms suddenly appeared from behind and grabbed Wang Xianxiao. Under the huge impact, the two of them retreated nearly 20 meters before they stopped. Wang Xianxiao spat out a mouthful of blood again. His face was pale, but his eyes were unprecedentedly cold. "What's going on?" A voice sounded behind Wang Xianxiao. Wang Xianxiao looked up at the person. The person who caught him was Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City. The three young heavenly sons had completely gathered. Wang Xianxia gritted his teeth and stood up, saying with a smile, Li Tianlan lost. He could be sure of his injury, and he could also be sure of Li Tianlan's injury. One was Li Tianlan without the abnormal protection of the cloud silk robe, and the other was not in the peak state. Facing his peak sword strike, it could be said that both of them were injured. Li Tianlan could still fight. So could Wang Xingxiao. But at this moment, Wang Xingxiao had Gu Hanshan, Jiang Shangyu, and dozens of elite soldiers from the two academies by his side. No matter how strong Li Tianlan was, how could he win when he was seriously injured? You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.